Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Україно, рідна земля мати, Господь, Отець наш Небесний, благословіть.
Благословіть!
Я йду знищувати!
Ворогів землі рідної! Вбити моїх братів!
Гвалтівників моїх посадок. Нехай рука моя буде твердою!
Щоб вбивати ворогів!
Нехай око моє буде ясним!
Щоб вбивати ворогів!
Нехай зброя моя буде справною!
Щоб вбивати ворогів!
Нехай воля моя буде сталь!
Щоб вбивати ворогів!
Україно! Рідна земля мати!
Господь, Отець наш Небесний!
Благословіть!
Наш рішучий наступ! Нашу священну помсту!
Нашу святу перемогу!
Yes. The Leaf Street Army sends its regards.
We've already passed
Let's
goal.
go.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards. The Lee Spring Army will never die. The Lee Spring Army will continue on until the very last shot is fired in this war. Let's go!
Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
LSA. Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day of 459 of the news. And of course, it is fundraiser night, and we have already smashed gold.
We have already passed $5,000 raised in support of the Revived Soldiers of Ukraine nonprofit, and it is amazing to know that no matter what, the Lee Spring Army continues to hold its ground and continues to shatter records, not just here, but across the entirety of YouTube, as we continue to save lives in Ukraine through the fundraisers we run on our Sundays. There will be nothing that ever stops this army. There will be nothing that stops us from helping Ukraine, and by damn it, we'll keep on working until the war is done. And so with that, welcome tonight, everyone. I'm sorry that I'm shouting, but I'm hyped as hell, and it's amazing to see. We already passed our first fundraiser goal, and we're racing on to the $7,500 goal as it is right now. Really quickly, let me go throw up my stream on my second screen so that way I can keep track of where the fundraiser is, because right now, we are at $5,300 in support of Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. And of course, what better fundraiser than to run than Revived Soldiers of Ukraine? It is an amazing nonprofit that has been in operation since 2019 and has been helping to save the lives of critically wounded soldiers in Ukraine and help them with rehabilitation to make sure they can get back on their feet and back into their normal lives. They've done an amazing job at that since 2019, and I highly suggest, although we've already passed our first goal, that you'll continue to support Revived Soldiers of Ukraine, and we blow this fundraiser up. The Lee Spring Army started its first fundraiser ever and was able to raise $30,000 on that very night for the American Red Cross in helping out in Ukraine, and I know that we're getting damn close to reaching $1 million raised. At this exact moment, right now, our fundraisers across the entirety of this channel's history have raised $963,809. It is a record amount. As far as YouTube fundraisers go, no community on YouTube has been able to fundraise as much as this army has been able to. It is an amazing effort that the Lee Spring Army has made, and it's one that will go down in the history books of YouTube as being one of the most impressive communities and one of the most giving and generous communities that this channel, this platform has ever seen. We're going to continue on, and we are just $37,000 away right now from the $1 million goal, and I know good and damn well we'll be reaching that within the next 2 weeks, regardless of what's going on, regardless of what anyone says. The Lee Spring Army will hold its ground and will continue to blow past these fundraiser goals, and nothing will stop us.
Let's go ahead and recognize this, because even though YouTube is having that glitch again where we can't see who's putting in what fundraiser amount, we do know who did it. Mark, General of the LSA, took us to that $5,000, $640 figure. Well, I'm screwing that all up, but big thanks to you, Mark, for that generous support to our fundraiser tonight, and a big
And of course, a huge thanks to Mark, General of the LSA, a well-deserved title, especially for someone who has helped out with these fundraisers so tremendously. And of course, we have to thank him again for joining us tonight and helping that fundraiser to get to where it is. Now, without further ado, and without continuing on about how amazing the Lee Spring Army has been, and how incredible it is that we've already reached $5.7 thousand on tonight's fundraiser in 16 minutes, it's time for us to get into the news. And so, starting off tonight, we'll be moving on into the Russian border area, specifically around the direction of Drushba in Ukraine, where we saw a Ukrainian military unit firing at a Russian car very close to the border. And so, without further ado, here is the clip. It has no audio, but we can see the Ukrainian soldier getting his RPG ready. We can see what appears to be the Russian car right there. He fires the RPG, and we couldn't really see it hit. Of course, we can't hear a boom either, because we actually don't have any audio, and he's reloading his RPG. And we can see him getting ready to fire off a second shot. You see him now lining it up again and firing into the direction where the trees are dark, and it appeared to have been a vehicle the first time, but we didn't see an explosion from that area, so it is a little bit up to grabs whether that is a vehicle or whether it isn't. We can now see the unit on the move and retreating from the area, and that's the end of the clip. But still, amazing to see that the Ukrainians are attacking Russian forces along the border, and of course ensuring that panic amongst the Russian citizenry continues as border security in between Ukraine and Russia appears to be dreadfully low. Speaking of what this title is about tonight, the Ukrainians were able to thwart one of the largest Russian attacks against Ukraine's infrastructure, against the Ukrainian citizenry in the history of this war. Over the course of last night, dozens of cruise missiles and dozens more Shahed drones were launched into the airspace of Ukraine in the intent to cause harm and death to the citizenry of this great nation of Ukraine. Over the course of the night, the Ukrainian air defense and these Russian missiles fought a deadly battle over the skies of Ukraine that would determine the fate of the people standing right below these explosions. Incredibly, the Ukrainian air defense was able to claim one of their greatest successes of the war, shooting down nearly every single cruise missile, save a small handful, and shooting down every single Shahed 136 that entered the airspace of Ukraine. We have several videos coming out, specifically an amazing one from Kyiv, showing the interception of one of these Shahed 136 drones. Starting off, though, we'll be moving on into the Chernihiv area, where we saw one of these Shaheds appearing to be shot down by small arms fire. Also, we're going to have to mute the chat music there, but we can see the tracer fire lighting up the night sky, and we can also see the Shahed being illuminated there. We can now see a Ukrainian machine gunner firing at the Shahed as well, and the thing blew up after being hit with a round. We can now see another Shahed flying over as well from another camera angle. Once again, the machine gunner lighting it up. And there goes another one blowing up right over the heads of the anti-aircraft gunners. And there's the crater after it was shot down, and that's the end of the clip. Amazing to know that they were able to stop the Shahed 136 before it made it to a city. Meanwhile, some of these Shaheds, considering that it was almost a wave of them that flew over Ukrainian air defenses in the area, was able to make its way on into Kyiv, because the air defenses in the area of Chernihiv were simply overwhelmed and were not able to shoot all of them down. This Shahed was less than a mile from hitting its target. We are assuming. It was almost directly over the center of the city, and things were getting incredibly tense, especially for the Ukrainian air defense, as one of their prey was about to make it to its target. Alas, a Ukrainian air defense system fired off a missile and was able to shoot down this Shahed 136 over the skies of Kyiv, and it was one of the most odd and interesting explosions that we've ever seen come from a drone in the war. I'm actually going to be showing you all the other clip first, considering it shows it a lot better than the second one. But without further ado, here is the clip. We can see the air defense missile flying across the sky and hitting the Shahed then exploding, and we'll see this video clip twice over right here. The missile explodes, and we can see this weird glowing blue, like Elmo's fire, St. Elmo's fire, coming out of the side of the Shahed after it had been hit directly and blown up over the city. A very interesting phenomenon. We have really never seen that before from a Shahed 136. Meanwhile, here's a second video taken from a closer area around where this drone was shot down in Kyiv, showing its interception once again. We can see it being hit right there, and the interesting, almost firework-like explosion that the shahed had. Once again, a huge credit has to be given to the Ukrainian air defense crews who have been working tirelessly since the beginning of this war to stop and intercept as many Russian cruise missiles and also kamikaze drones as possible since this war began. They have done amazing jobs, and while they are not the brave frontline soldiers we see lugging forward an AK or a machine gun to lay down fire on the Russian infantry squads fighting in Bakhmut, these people have visibly saved lives. That drone right there was flying right over the city of Kyiv, and this building right over here in this video is probably filled with dozens of Ukrainian citizens, much like every other building inside the city. If that drone had been able to go onto its final plunge down into the earth and hit one of these buildings, the amount of casualties would of course be untold, and most likely a dozen or more dead. And yet the Ukrainian air defense was able to somehow fire off that missile at a very incredible speed and was able to intercept the shahed before it was able to hit the city. And of course, it's always important to remember these brave men in the Ukrainian air defense units and also in the front lines, and these are the kinds of folks that are being helped out by Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. Not to plug the fundraiser a lot tonight, but considering that Sunday fundraisers are always intent on helping to save as many Ukrainian lives as possible, this is a perfect time to talk about these brave men. Because they give everything they have to defend this country. They give their sleep, they give their lives, they give their bodies to Ukraine to ensure that these people who are living within this building right here will continue to live free and continue to live safe from Russian attacks. Those people deserve everything we can give them, and a small token of our appreciation can of course be shown through Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. Revived Soldiers of Ukraine specifically focuses on the soldiers who have given nearly everything in the defense of their country. Some of the soldiers that end up in the care of Revived Soldiers of Ukraine have been shot through the leg. They've had their limbs amputated due to Russian bullets or shrapnel finding their way to their limbs, and many other things. Wherein Revived Soldiers of Ukraine helps them through the rehabilitation process to make sure that they will be able to walk again and they'll be able to function again and hopefully return back to their normal lives as best as they can. And that's why we run a fundraiser for Revived Soldiers of Ukraine, because the kind of, I guess you could say, appreciation that shows is that we are incredibly grateful to all of the soldiers that may not be as lucky as these guys in the air defense to simply shoot down a shahed, the ones that have been wounded and nearly killed on the lines in defense of Ukraine and the entirety of the Western world. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this small video clip in the city of Kyiv, and we're now going to be moving on out of the area and out of our videos of the drone attacks on Kyiv overnight, all of them, of course, failing. We're now going to be moving on down into Mariupol, because interestingly enough, we actually have the closest thing to video evidence we have ever gotten at this point of a Storm Shadow actually flying into its target. And so here's the clip of a Storm Shadow hitting its target within the city of Mariupol. We can hear the missile flying over, and we can see the camera trying to track this object flying in air, although we can't really see it all too well. And a plume of smoke rising in the distance from what may have already been a hit target.
Блядь, они не в Юрьевку?
We can now hear the explosion,
Ебать.
and we can now see the second explosion as well from that Storm Shadow.
Слушай, надо идти куда-то дальше. Сейчас взорвется. Блядь, только не в Марик. Может, это учение реально не проводят?
Unlike Ukrainian air defense, Russian air defense simply cannot compare, especially to the kind of technology that Ukrainian missiles now possess, thanks to the British providing the Storm Shadow missile.
Мы по базам въебали. Ну, честно, это было бы адекватно. Ну...
It's incredible to see that the Ukrainians have been able to use the Storm Shadow to such a great effect and have been able to hit targets behind the lines that otherwise were not reachable. They've been able to hit targets in Berdyansk, Mariupol, and Luhansk City thanks to the effective range and the almost stealth capabilities of the Storm Shadow missile. We're now going to be moving on from the city of Mariupol, once again showing that while Ukrainian air defense is able to stop a Russian attack, Russian air defense isn't that capable in stopping a Ukrainian attack on their own military. Moving on into the western area of Ukraine as well, we saw that the Azov is continuing to train for the day that they'll be able to push forward in mass. Currently, the 3rd Brigade, which is the Azov, is fighting in the southern flank of Bakhmut at this moment. And they, of course, need even more soldiers and even more men to continue on this push through Russian-occupied territory and to make sure to liberate as much land as possible. We can actually see some pictures of these guys in training right here. We can see a soldier with what appears to be an AK of some kind. It appears to be a heavily modified AK. And we can also see that he has a little camouflage net over him, of course, on the training fields. In the next picture, we can also see them training to operate the RPG-7, which, of course, many of y'all have come to know, not just during this war, but even before the war. It's the famous shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon. We can also see them bringing in an Mi-8 or an Mi-17 helicopter as they're operating an SPG-9 recoilless rifle, and we can also see a little group of guys here, most likely posing for the camera. In the final picture, we can once again see Azov soldiers continuing to train on the RPG-7 and trying to learn how to operate the RPG-7 as best as possible. Once again, it is great to see these kinds of pictures because they show us a verifiable proof that Ukrainian forces never cease in constantly trying to improve their fighting force, making sure that they're more effective, capable, and deadly against the Russians by the next day. And so, once again, huge credit to the Azov, specifically the 3rd Brigade, which made unbelievable gains in the southern flank of Bakhmut around 2 weeks ago, and continue on the fight and bringing it directly to the Russians. We're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news in the area of western Ukraine, and we're now moving directly on into the location unknowns. And we actually have some pretty interesting location unknowns tonight, to say the least. Not to hype them up or anything, but they are pretty neat. Starting off
with your own horn. Go ahead.
we're gonna toot the horn, man. And so we can see that everyone got soaked on this tank. This is a Ukrainian tank that was driving through a pretty wet road, I guess you could say, and it flung up some water and everyone got soaked. So here's the clip. You can see the tank driving down the street. And we can see the water being flung up and out.
Oh, jeez.
Oh,
that's that
man.
nasty water. I was about to say this thing could hydroplane, but then again, it weighs a ton.
Yeah, this thing weighs nearly 40 tons, so I don't think it'll be hydroplaning, but man, these guys just got soaked. The driver nearly drowned.
But they had fun, though.
Of course, they must have had fun. And oh my god, this guy still got water pouring off of his face. Oh man, you know what if you ask him, hey, what does that taste like? He's probably gonna say, this water, it tastes like nasty stuff.
It's like dookie.
It tastes like dookie water. Oh man, but he is soaked head to toe. Somehow it even got him while he was behind the cupola hatch. I mean, man, they got drenched. And I bet you the inside of that tank is drenched too. And God forbid, it's going to probably start rusting in there. So they're going to have to probably maintain that thing a little bit extra here in the near future. Moving on from that little clip where everyone got soaked, which is pretty funny, and on into the next one, we also saw some Ukrainian soldiers on the move, and we're starting to notice that more and more Ukrainian soldiers are beginning to implement improvised camouflage, or unfortunately, if someone could help me out with this in the live chat, I don't actually know the exact name of the kind of camouflage where you just get leaves and twigs from the surrounding area and attach them to your uniform. I know that some people are going to say that's a ghillie suit, but a ghillie suit is kind of a specially made suit to appear like that covers your whole body. I don't know what this is exactly called, but we can see them moving on out, and we can see that all of them have tried to throw on a little bit of foliage, and it appears that they're getting quite bushy, and they also have a dachshund with them. Go get him, buddy. And so that's the end of the clip, and really cool to see that all of these folks are making sure to camouflage as best as they can, and hopefully they'll be able to get the Russians by surprise. The Russians will be saying, Matthew, the bushes, they're speaking Ukrainian. What the hell? But anyways,
the Ukrainians really do the camouflage really good. I haven't really seen a ton of footage of the Americans doing it, but they seem like they're really good masters at it, the Ukrainians.
They really do. And back in the day, during the Second World War, it was fairly common actually to see a decent amount of Soviet and German soldiers, particularly on the Eastern Front, to try and put some kind of foliage on them to make themselves blend in with the fields and plains a little bit easier. So it's very interesting to see that, once again, that's making a bit of a return. We don't see this on the Russian side, though. We've only really seen this on the Ukrainian side. And we also have another example of this in the next clip right here. So we'll be bouncing back to the other one with the Ukrainian drill instructor here in a second. But here's another clip of them trying to get down this whole put on the limbs and leaves onto our camo kind of stuff.
Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава нації! Смерть ворогам! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе! Путін! Хуйло! Хто? Хуйло! Хто? Хуйло! Слава ТШ!
Man, I gotta tell you, man, those are some very patriotic bushes right there. Those are some really patriotic ones. You sit there, man, you're walking through the garden, and you go, Slava Ukraini, and you hear, Hurram, Slava, from all the bushes around you. It's like, oh god, this is bad. But still, really interesting to see. They're really starting to get into, at least from video evidence, this kind of camouflage technique. Very interesting. Also, I would assume that it'd be very effective at making sure to hide their silhouette. And so with that, we're going to be moving on into our next little bit of Location Unknown news, where we get to see a Ukrainian drill instructor in action. Many people always know the drill instructor. That's one thing that people know inside the Army and outside the Army. They're greatly feared here in the United States, particularly the ones from the U.S. Marine Corps, because they've grown a bit of a reputation through pop culture and also through people who have had to deal with the Marine Corps drill instructors. Not just those, but the Army as well. But this is fairly interesting. We rarely ever see a Ukrainian drill instructor on film, and we are getting a pretty good look right here at what Ukrainian training looks like in some aspects, and also how Ukrainian drill instructors, I guess you could say, behave around their, I guess you could say, pupils, or students, as we'll call them. And so with that, here's the clip. I'm just saying, you know, drill instructors are scary enough. This guy looks like he'd just pick you up and snap you in two if you didn't qualify, and he'd be like, next. He'd be like, bring the next one up. And we can also see that they're all having to push along a BTR 60 with nothing more than their sheer power.
Man, he's got a bat.
Man, he's got a whole stick. Are they thwacking people? Oh, they're hitting people on the head with it?
Damn.
Dang.
Damn, son.
Damn, son. Where'd you find that stick? Bonk. Dude, he must be Nafo. He's bonking him. Dude, that's
the real life reincarnation of bonking.
Dude, that's real life bonking right there. This is called Nafo motivation. And we can now see the guys in the back are trying to still continue to push the BTR. The other guys on the side have been told to not do that anymore, and they're now being moved off the road. Now all of them are being moved off the road. Once again, hitting another guy in the helmet, apparently the slower one of the bunch. And now they're going on a hike. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but a little bit of a look into what drill instructors act like in the Ukrainian army and what Ukrainian soldiers go through a little bit during their basic training. Very interesting to see, and also, I wonder what if OSHA would approve of them hitting folks on the head with large sticks. I feel like OSHA would think that that is some kind of a workplace violation, but luckily for the Ukrainians, OSHA is nothing more than a myth. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on.
OSHA's never going to show up with that drill instructor standing around.
Man, the OSHA guy will come out with a clipboard, and this guy will come out with a log, and he'll go, I see nothing wrong. Have a great day. And he just turns around and walks off. Anyways, we're now going to be moving on from our location unknowns right there and on into the Russian casualty report for the day. And today's casualty report has been fairly interesting.
Two more.
Two bobcats.
Consistently killing bobcats on the daily now.
Consistently. I mean, pretty impressive, you have to say. And of course, the memes are present in Kyiv Independence replies of all of the bobcats. Actually, that's just like a tractor, but we'll count it. We'll count it. And a burned out bobcat, a bobcat throwing dirt on itself. Many bobcats. Great bobcats. Love to see bobcats. And on top of that, 2 old bobcats were destroyed. Nobody can ever scoff at a whole 2 bobcats destroyed. Not only that, 400 Russian soldiers have been wiped out over the past 24 hours. That is not a incredibly high number. That's actually a little bit below the war's average, but still great to see that they are taking out Russian soldiers on a consistent basis. We also saw that 7 armored personnel carriers were destroyed over the past 24 hours as well. Once again, a little bit below average, but still not that bad. That's 7 whole APCs destroyed. 9 supply trucks were destroyed as well, along with 3 main battle tanks, 11 artillery systems, 3 drones, and then nothing in any other category. In all honesty, today has been a little bit below average in every single regard. But one thing is certain is that while these casualty losses are a little bit below average, the Ukrainians were able to declare a victory over their skies last night, and on top of that, we still see that the 3rd Brigade and the other brigades in the area around Bakhmut are continuing to put a decent amount of pressure onto the Russian flanks around the city of Bakhmut, and are, of course, making sure to ratchet up the pressure onto the Russian army. We're now going to be moving on from our casualty report, and on into an interesting question that has been asked tonight. Many of y'all have had an answer to this question. At this point, almost 1,000 of y'all have answered this question, a little bit more than that. And I want to hear, Matthew, what are folks thinking about that question?
Wow, is that the new poll segue?
Yeah, and you weren't supposed to say
Wow,
that.
that's clean.
It's supposed to be making it clean, and you just made it unclean.
It was so clean, I almost didn't recognize it. But anyways, moving on into our polls, our very first one says, last night, Russia conducted the largest drone attack on Kyiv to date. 54 drones were used, and what are your thoughts? And by the way, 52 were shot down, so only 2 hit their target. It looks like 62% said Russia is trying to stifle the offensive, 4% said unsure, 4% said it seems a little unusual, and 30% said Russia is just doing the usual. And I would personally say that Russia is trying to get a head start and stifle the offensive. But we've had goal.
Go! Let's go! $7,588 raised in support of revived soldiers of Ukraine.
That's very nice.
7,500 raised in support of revived soldiers of Ukraine. Let's all think about that for a minute. $7,588. That is an unbelievable figure. Amazing figure, actually. And what's even more incredible about it is that nobody has been able to see, rather than my single $100 donation, who has been able to help out with that fundraiser tonight. And yet, once again, even without recognition, the Lee Spring Army has selflessly donated $7,588 in support of Ukraine. Of course, I have to say that is an amazing thing that the entire Lee Spring Army can take credit for, and I feel that every single person that considers themselves a Lee Spring Army soldier, folks like Jesus UCSB, Carta, Sue B, Miss Disa, _ Terrence Custer, Timeout, BBTH Huz, Lewis, Randy C. Santiago, Leanna, Squamous Tarkus, Mr. Attitude, David Gear, Slavo Ukraini 777, Word Guy, Angry Penguin, Trister, Mark, and everyone else, the thousands of y'all who are here tonight. All of y'all should feel great pride for what we've been able to achieve again tonight. We have done amazing things, and incredible things, for 459 days of the war, and this is another one of those great and triumphant days where we can all look and say that the Lee Spring Army has once again stood up to what it is here to do, and is continuing to help in a massive way to save the lives of Ukrainian soldiers over there, thousands of miles away from most of us, in a country that is continuing to fight for their very existence. And I've got to thank you all so much once again for being a part of this, and I got to thank you all so much for once again in just a simple 40 minutes being able to reach over $7,500, and we're now almost on our way to $8,000. It's unbelievable, and I gotta thank you all so much once again for being an amazing part of this. If y'all think it's amazing, and I think that many people would be very proud to see this, because this is the call of the entirety of this community, put an LSA in the chat if you think that that is amazing that we've reached $7.5 thousand in 40 minutes. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving back into that poll, I personally think that Russia is trying to stifle Ukraine's offensive by attacking Kyiv with all these Shahed drones at once. Like the enforcer said earlier, it's the largest attack that they've ever conducted on Kyiv with that amount of drones. 54, that is a very large amount. But of course, the air defenses in Kyiv were working really well, and they took down an overwhelming majority of those drones, and only 2 hit their target. And luckily, not too much damage sustained, but unfortunately, there was 1 casualty. But enforcer, what say you?
I would say it's, of course, amazing to know that the Ukrainian air defense somehow was not overwhelmed by those massive numbers of Shaheds. And also, I would say that the Russians are attempting to most likely overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses, but it's proving to be next to impossible, especially due to the accuracy and also the sheer scale of Ukrainian air defenses at this point in the war. And so I'd have to agree with the 62% of y'all. They are attempting to overwhelm it, but then to add on to that, I don't think they're succeeding whatsoever. And so with that, hope that does address that question fairly well. And let's get on into the next one.
All right, and the next poll says, with a Taliban/Iran conflict looming, will this impact Russia's weapons shipments from Iran? 58% said yes, it most likely would. 9% said unsure. 20% said maybe, but possibly not. And 14% said no, it won't affect arms exports. And I'd imagine that if the Taliban did decide to attack Iran, which it looks like they might possibly end up doing, and if you're curious, it's over a water dispute that's been going on for quite some time, but the Taliban have decided it's time to do some action. And kind of odd to say that, considering the Taliban was our arch nemesis a while back, but now they're kind of in charge of Afghanistan. I would say that it most likely would impact weapon shipments, and that would be a great thing for Ukraine. So maybe they can, encourage the Taliban to go ahead and start that little conflict and maybe disrupt those shipments. But Enforcer, what say you?
So to get into a little bit of what I tried to read up today on this border skirmish, it is actually happening in this area. We actually zoomed in on this tonight, and I was going to start giving some I guess you could say, kind of ideas of what I would assume was happening. And I was going to assume it was happening here. It actually is. And honestly, it's the only place it could happen because this is the only, I guess you could say, settled part near the border around Zaranj and also Zabul, which is to the very far east of the Iranian nation. They are fighting over a water dispute. The issue is that the Iranians are actually kind of trying to stop water from flowing into Afghanistan. And of course, y'all can kind of see from the area that this is in, which is around the Kandahar province, which is one of the most arid and dry parts of Afghanistan. Water is a very, I guess you could say, rare commodity in this part of the country. And so the Iranians trying to contain the flow of water into Afghanistan is a very serious issue, especially for the local population that lives within that area. And so from what I understand, the Afghans are actually beginning to cross the border into Iran and create actually a fairly sizable border skirmish from what we've heard with the Iranians in an attempt to try and force some kind of concessions or a war where hopefully they will be able to get control over the water supply. That's currently what it's over right now, at least from what we're understanding. But once again, I've kind of tried to look at this today, but of course Ukraine took precedent amongst a bunch of whole other things in the background, and so I wasn't really able to look at it all too well today, but that's at least my understanding of it from what I was able to see. So with that in mind, it is something that I would actually have to say, I would back up the, and this sounds so weird, especially considering that this would have been different around 2 years ago. I would actually see that in my opinion, of course, just airing that out there, this isn't, who's right and who's wrong, but I would actually kind of side with the Taliban on this one, considering that the Iranians are blocking the flow of precious water into their country that people use to survive, because obviously without water, people just die of thirst. So I would say that it's honestly a pretty good fight, I guess you could say, for the Afghans, considering that the Iranians are trying to mess with them through the water supply. But fairly interesting to hear, and I do think that may start to impact Iranian weapon shipments to Russia, considering they may want to start using those against the Taliban instead. But I gotta say, that is the wildest thing, Matthew. The two countries that the United States probably hates the most at this point, Afghanistan and Iran, going to war with each other. That is pretty wild, I have to say.
It blows me away to hear anyone say that they think the Taliban's on the right side, but it's weird how the tables turn sometimes, and even your enemies sometimes become the people you have to team up with to achieve your objectives. And in my opinion, if we can use the Taliban to disrupt arms shipments, I say go ahead and use them.
And I would say so as well. And also, everyone's actually telling me it's the other way around. So let me correct that real quick. I would actually have to say if it's the other way around, I would end up supporting Iran in this conflict, or at least understanding where they're coming from, because people are actually saying that I misread it, and it's actually the Afghans who are stopping the flow of water into Iran. And if that is the case,
you sure?
Well, that's what a couple of viewers in the chat said. And let me go and pull this up real quick. Let me go and pull this up real quick because I want to make sure we're getting this correct. Iran news. So, let's see, Russia has launched this Ukraine. Let's see, at least 3 killed. in the Iran-Afghan border. So let's read the Reuters article real quick, and let's make sure that we're getting the story correct. 2 Iranian border guards and 1 Taliban fighter were killed after shooting broke out near a border post. It was not immediately clear what had provoked the incident, which several people were injured, but it also came amid tensions between the 2 countries over water rights. Iran has accused Afghanistan's Taliban rulers of violating a 1973 treaty by restricting the flow of water from the Helmand River to Iran's parched eastern regions, an accusation denied by the Taliban. Today in Nemras province, Iranian border guards fired towards Afghanistan, which was met with a counter-reaction. Spokesman from the Taliban-run Interior Minister Abdul Nafi Taqor said in a statement, "The situation is under control now. The Islamic Emirate does not want to fight with its neighbors," the spokesman said, without identifying the victims. He said 1 person had been killed on each side and several injured, though Iran's official IRNA news agency later said 2 Iranian border guards had been killed and 2 Iranian civilians had been injured. And so it actually is the case that, at least according to the Iranian claim, that the Afghans are actually stopping water from flowing down the Helmand River and into eastern Iran. At least that's the claim. The Taliban, or the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, is officially denying that claim and saying that there has been no such attempt at blocking the flow of water.
So the Taliban are supposedly hogging the water from Iran?
Supposedly, the Taliban has got a water-shaped belly, and they're going, I don't know where the water went. they're saying that. I'm gonna have to be honest. We need to look real quick. We're actually going to do a little bit of a deep dive into this, considering that this is something that is heating up in the realm of conflicts. Let's look at the Helmand River. So this is the Helmand River. It's actually the one right through here, the only pretty much green area in this entire southern area of Afghanistan. That is the Helmand River. Now, the real question is there any way for them to block the water moving through the Helmand River? So let's see if there is. Let's see, history. Let's see, however, let's see, list of rivers in Afghanistan. Let's see, wait a minute. See, also, let's see, located on the Helmand River. And then there's also the Kamal Khan Dam, which is a hydroelectric dam that is actually kind of close to the border. So let's see if we can find that dam. And here's the Kamal Khan Dam, which is a hydroelectric dam meant to generate power. And we can see that there is a kind of sign, at least for the area, at least for the rainfall that occurs in this area, there's actually a little bit of a sizable reservoir here, and this is really one of the only dams that they could possibly use to water from going into Iran. So it is possible. The Afghans do have the ability to be stopping the flow of water from Afghanistan into Iran, thanks to this hydroelectric dam. The other dam, however, that we saw listed here, the Kajaki Dam, it does not appear to have any kind of, I guess you could say, ability to regulate the flow of water. It appears that if it fills up, it just spills over. I may be incorrect with that, though, because I don't really know a lot about these kinds of, I guess you could say, earthwork dams, but it doesn't appear to be advanced enough to actually regulate the flow of water. However, the other one, the Kamal Khan Dam, actually can. So it is entirely possible, and it is within, I guess you could say, a realistic statement to say that they could be stopping the flow of water into Iran. If that is the case, that is enough to make people go to war. Some people may or may not know that, but water rights is something that is heavily contended in a lot of countries around the world. For example, the Pakistanis and the Indians heavily fight over control of the Kashmir region because a lot of the major rivers in this area actually begin, I guess you could say, their source is in the Kashmir region. And so if India controls it, they control the water flowing into Pakistan. They could build dams up there and start to restrict the flow of water, which could greatly impact Pakistan. And if the Pakistanis gain control of Kashmir, they could also do the same thing for India. And then if the Chinese get control of Kashmir, because they actually threw their hat into the ring not too long ago, maybe I would say around the 90s or so, they could actually start to control the water flowing into both India and Pakistan, which either gives them a lot of political sway or diplomatic sway over the actions of India and Pakistan, or they can start to just screw over the Indians and Pakistanis if they go against their wishes. So water rights is a very large issue, and going off of the alleged claim that Afghanistan is stopping the flow of water into Iran, I could actually see that the Iranian side on starting a conflict over water rights, because it's actually a pretty serious issue, especially in arid places in the world like Iran and Afghanistan. But if that claim is completely unfounded, which of course we don't know whether it is founded or not, so we're just trying to, give out the hypotheticals here. If it is an unfounded claim, then that's an unjust provocation against the Afghans for what they're doing. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, or at least go into the quick information that we can find on the subject of what's going on in between Iran and Afghanistan. And there's actually a whole lot more historically behind the scenes in between Iran and Afghanistan, but that's for a whole different time. Maybe for a separate video on its own, although I don't know if that would ever come around, honestly. But with that, hope that does address that poll fairly well. And I, once again, think that that'll probably stop Iranian weapon shipments, especially if they're starting to eyeball some kind of a mobilization or a war with Afghanistan. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our last poll says Ukraine threatens Iran after numerous Shahed drones are used to attack Kyiv, and can Ukraine actually retaliate against Iran? 45% said yes, they have the capacity to do it. 11% said unsure. 24% said maybe, need more info. And 20% said no, they can't retaliate on them. And for me, I'm actually going to fall within the 20%. I personally don't think that Ukraine has the capacity at the moment right now to retaliate against Iran. They're pretty far away, even though Ukraine claimed that they're geographically separated and they can strike them. I simply don't think that's possible. That's also kind of unwise because Ukraine needs to focus on their counteroffensive, and attacking Iran is opening a whole new can of worms. So I would be with the 20%. But Enforcer, what say you?
And, reread the line.
It's on the screen.
Oh, okay, Jack. Ukraine transfer. Let's see. After numerous Shahed drones are used to attack Kyiv, can Ukraine actually retaliate? I'd actually have to say I'd have to go with the 20% as well. I don't think they can retaliate. You have to consider that Ukraine isn't a global superpower like the United States, where we can just kind of show up anywhere we wish. Ukraine is a regional power, and so they aren't really able to power project anywhere unless if it's a country directly near their borders. So I would say that there's really nothing they can do to Iran, but of course they could always lobby countries in the Western world like the United States that could possibly do something to Iran. But I don't think the Ukrainians have the ability themselves to be able to go out and attack the Iranians. So I'd actually have to go with the 20% on that as well. And if anyone actually knows how they could do it, rather than spies and espionage and things like that, please let me know, because I don't know of any weaponry or technology that the Ukrainians would possess that would make it possible for them to somehow attack the Iranians outright as a consequence of their actions of supplying the Russians with Shahed drones. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, I would like to remind everyone tonight that during Sunday fundraisers, there is no super chat queue ahead of live chat questions. Tonight is an entirely live chat question night, and is one of the great benefits of the Sunday fundraiser. And so if you do have a question, just put @EnforcerMatt in front of it, and then ask your question. Matthew will put it into a spreadsheet, and then hopefully we will get around to addressing all of them, hopefully by the end of the night. Hello there. And so with that, we are actually going to be moving into those live chat questions right now, and of course some very interesting ones. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And also, just an update, folks. We're at $8,231 on the
What?
fundraiser. So big thanks to all of you once again. I'm not sure if we went through the whole spill or not about hitting the goal a second time. Did we?
We did actually.
Okay,
And,
I
and
forgot.
Really
but,
quickly though.
But seriously though, big thanks to everyone who donated, small and large. Sadly tonight we don't know exactly who donated, but y'all know who you are. And big thanks once again for another extremely successful fundraiser for a really good charity. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I have to say that is absolutely incredible to know that we've raised nearly $8.2 thousand for the fundraiser. It's a good bit over $8K, and we're nearly $730 over the $7,500 goal. And this is making me think that tonight may be the night. It may be the night for something we have not done for about the past 3 fundraisers, which has nearly been a month. There has been something deep within the channel history that many of y'all may know about. It is a famous rallying call for the fundraisers, and rarely, well, it used to be greatly used, almost every single fundraiser, but over time we've started to lay off on its use. But I have a feeling that the ancient right of the general order must be brought back forth, and so that way we can see if it'd be possible tonight to get over the $10,000 mark. of course, I'm not saying that the general order has been called yet, because I actually have to go and change the fundraiser goal real quick. So everyone just hold, and let me go change the fundraiser goal. So let's go here. Let's go to edit, add details, set a goal, and backspace that, and then put in 10K, continue, and save. And so that goal should have moved up to $10,000. And of course, I'm not one to tell everyone onwards, men, and then just sit around in the corner. I'm, of course, going to throw in $20 into the general order here real quick. But at this moment, general order number 20 is now active. If you have $5 to throw in your $5 right now. Hopefully, the Lee Spring Army can pass the $10,000 goal set tonight, because I know something deep down. Lee Spring Army is the greatest, I guess you could say, community on all of YouTube. It is an amazing community, an unbelievable one. And nobody's ever been able to top the Lee Spring Army and what we've been able to do in helping to save lives throughout all of Ukraine. And so General Order number 20, once again, is now active. If you have $5 to throw it in. If you have anything to throw it in. And make sure to help this fundraiser to reach the $10,000 goal here in a minute. Of course, we won't be able to see it happening live, because back in the day, YouTube actually used to have this cool little feature where they would have a window in the live chat that would actually tell us where it was, and that made it really easy for us and all of y'all to see it. But then they removed that, and then also they mess around with whether we can see who's donating and who's not anymore for some reason. I don't know why. But anyways, with that, we're going to be waiting for General Order number 20 to do its thing. And it's already doing its charm. It's already... oh my god! It just passed!
Damn!
Good
Who
god!
did
We
that?
just got up to 10,000! Yo! Let's go!
Somebody fess up. Fess up. Who did that massive donation? That was huge.
Man! Oh my gosh! We're up to 10.3! Amazing! And it's great to see it. It's great to see it. And I got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for getting this fundraiser to where it is. And so with that, let's get on into the live chat.
It was Mark. He put in that sly comment. He said, we're over 10K. Thank you, Mark. Big thanks. Seriously, though, you are literally carrying the fundraiser tonight, along with everyone else. And a huge thanks to you, because this charity is excellent. And Enforcer, if you would like to go over what they do one more time, because I see some folks asking about it, I'm sure that would be a huge help.
So, to go through what Revive Soldiers of Ukraine does, Revive Soldiers of Ukraine is a nonprofit that's focused on the rehabilitation of seriously wounded Ukrainian soldiers. And so, say a Ukrainian soldier gets shot in the face and survives somewhere in the front lines. He is then, of course, taken to a hospital where they, of course, make sure that he will live and make sure to not suffer greatly from those injuries. And then Revive Soldiers of Ukraine takes over and starts to help out with the rehabilitation of that soldier, most likely now citizen. The citizen... Well, the soldier, more like, we'll continue to call him a soldier, because obviously he's not in Revive Soldier of Ukraine just being a random Joe Blow off the street. He is helped out in either getting back his motor functions or being able to figure out how to live with a prosthetic and making sure that he can get back to his normal life. And of course, fundraisers like Doctors Without Borders, they help out greatly in Ukraine in giving life-saving surgeries and other kinds of stuff to these guys and, of course, Ukrainian citizens overall. But one thing that's always very important to remember about these folks who do suffer these very serious injuries is that the path to rehabilitation is sometimes far more difficult than just the path to survive, and takes far longer and is incredibly difficult. And Revive Soldiers of Ukraine helps out in that focus of making sure that these Ukrainian soldiers will once again hopefully be able to return back to as normal a life as possible. And that's what these fundraisers are for. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, what Revive Soldiers of Ukraine is, what they do, and what they are for, as we have now passed $10.6 thousand. We're at $10,618 on the fundraiser. And of course, the Lee Spring Army is sending their regards. And so with that, thank you to every single one of y'all so much once again. I wish we could call y'all out, but sadly we don't have any names to call out tonight, unfortunately, because we can't see them in the live chat. But with that, we are now going to be moving on into the questions that a lot of y'all have thrown in and answer 3 of them. And so with that, what do we got?
All right, and up first, we have the Morse code decoders of the stream. We have Mark Hodges, Cfay, JP's Gone Fishing, Cliff Simonson, Earl Bernew, and also Paul Schultz. They said tonight's Morse cipher says, onwards LSA towards the 1 million. Now LSA will never stop helping Ukraine.
And that is the correct Morse code message. We are going to race on our way towards 1 million, and nothing is going to stop the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And so with that, thank you all for deciphering that Morse code message, and it's great to know that that message rang true tonight as the Lee Spring Army continues to race well on its way to the goal. And so with that, hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one is from Richie MC, who says, what do you think about the Iran-Afghan conflict? Also, Ukraine is threatening action against Iran for providing Russian drones, and would and could Ukraine really do, and could they possibly supply the Taliban?
The closest thing they could probably do in reality is stop grain shipments to Iran. That's probably the best they could do, and I don't really know how much of Iranian grain is received from Ukrainian shipments. On the other hand, there's not really a lot more that they could do beyond that, and that's kind of a little bit of an indirect thing, more an economic sanction against the Iranians than anything else. So there's really no direct conflict that the Ukrainians can have with Iran, at least at the moment. Now, on the other hand, in between the conflict in between Iran and Afghanistan, I've got to be honest on this one. I think that the United States should not do anything to either side. Obviously, if we say, it's understandable that if the Afghans are stopping water from flowing into Iran, you can kind of sympathize with the Iranians not having any water in the eastern part of their country. However, obviously, we would not support them because they're a rival of the United States. They're an insignificant rival, but a rival nonetheless. And so I would, of course, stick firmly on the side of we should not support those people. I also think that we should not support the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan either, considering that it is a group of terrorists that is running a country. So wouldn't support either of them at all, but I would have to say if there is a conflict starting over water rights, the Iranians probably would be in the right if it is true that the Afghans are blocking water from entering Iran, thanks to one of the dams on the, and let me make sure I get the name correct again. What's the name of the river? Come on, river, what's the name? That is a thin-ass river. That's a creek, man. That's no river, that's a creek. But what is this river called? It's like the... Dang it, I forgot the name of it. And we just went over it a second ago. But anyways, they're stopping flow down that river, which is the river in question. They obviously have a bit of a right to try and secure their own water rights and their own water security. So that would be my opinion on it. So if the Afghans are actually blocking water, then it's probably going to be a war. Once again, honestly, it could be the Iranians. It could be that everyone's going through a drought over there, and the Iranians are falsely claiming that they are, in fact, blocking the water, when actually the Afghans are not blocking the water. There's just less water thanks to a drought, and they're trying to strong-arm the Afghans into giving them water that is already in limited supply, and the Afghans don't really have a lot of, so that way the Iranians can, of course, be the one coming out of this better off. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, but once again, I would have to say that while there may be, at least in this particular one-lined instance, a right or wrong side, and of course we're not talking about Iran or Afghanistan as a whole, we're just talking about the alleged claim being made that could start this conflict, it would appear that the Iranians would actually be, if their allegation is true, on the right side, or more so the side that one could sympathize with. At the same time, however, they're both evil groups of people, and for that reason, while we can say that one side's in the right or the wrong, we shouldn't do anything, either economic sanctions or provide them with weaponry, either side, that would further one side's goals or the other. And so with that, I hope that does address that question fairly well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to none other than Jay Bagwell, who says, honest question, what would be the fallout of the U.S. launching a few Tomahawks to destroy the Shahed factories?
That's an interesting question. And I would have to be honest, I wouldn't really be certain. If we look through history, we do know that the United States has gotten very close to doing things against the Iranians on several occasions, but we have not really done anything directly against them, except for the whole embassy ordeal, trying to land special forces guys in the desert, and then, the plane blows up, and it's like, oh crap, this ain't great. That's probably one of the only things that we've really done, at least directly against him, that I can remember from my memory. Correct me if I'm wrong. I would say we could probably do something like that. It's not completely out of the question. I mean, after all, we did end up killing General Soleimani at the airport in Baghdad with a, what the hell was that thing, Matthew? What was it called? It's like the Ginsu knife thing.
Oh yeah, the knife bomb.
Yeah, the thing that just flings like a giant jet blade at you. It just gets you. We did do that, so it's not out of the question to say we could possibly attack the Iranian mainland outright and destroy the shahed factories. But at the same time, who will come up to bat for the Iranians? And to be honest, I think that the Chinese may actually end up coming to bat for them. Because while the Chinese don't have any extremely direct connections to the Iranians right now, standing up for the Iranians and bringing in, I guess you could say, the strong arm into the situation could probably greatly help out the Chinese with their Belt and Road project later on, as the Iranians are actually a part of this proposed, I guess you could say, road part of the Belt and Road project. So I think that if we did something like that, the Chinese would probably come up to bat, but at that point we would have already achieved what we wanted to. The shahed factories would be destroyed. There would probably be a very tense diplomatic standoff in between the Chinese and the United States, and then that would be that, and I don't think much would change. So I think it is possible. It's not really like the Iranians could do anything that they're not already doing. And I would say that we need to approach that, though, with caution, considering that the consequences could be a little bit larger than just attacking Iran and having a sole Iranian response. It could also be a Chinese response as well, possibly. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Very interesting question, by the way, Jay. And once again, that's my opinion, because who knows how that would go. But that's kind of what I think it would go like. And so with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting right back into the news.
And also, real quick, because it registered in my head, but I'm not sure exactly what the context was. The guy that was taken out under Orange Man, al-Baghdadi, where was he from?
Al-Baghdadi. I think al-Baghdadi was the leader of ISIS at the time. Let me pull that up. Al-Baghdadi. Yeah, he was the leader of ISIS until he was killed in 2019.
Okay.
He was crying.
So he was in Syria and Iraq. I thought maybe he was in Afghanistan.
No. He was killed in Syria, actually, in Barisha, Syria. General Soleimani is the one who was running some of the terrorist groups that the Iranians sponsor, or at least he was kind of keeping a great connection with them in the area. And then we ended up killing him, I believe, on the way out of the Baghdad International Airport. Let me see. I think it was actually right here on this turn. He was killed somewhere right here.
Interesting.
And also, look, it's Saddam Hussein's palace.
Wait a minute, al-Baghdadi's the one that went, crying and screaming and running down the bunker and cowering in fear.
Yeah, supposedly, like, anyone could actually get that information. He was crying, he was screaming. Like, it's like, oh, come on. It's like, how in the hell do you tell he's crying and screaming? But, anyways, with that, we are on to the next one. Well, actually, I think that was... I think we're on to our last one.
We have one last question.
Yes, we do. I'm so confused. But on to the last one.
And the last question goes to AF Kaplan, who says, could these Shahed factories be subject to cyber attacks instead?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure, certainly. Like, cyber warfare is something that doesn't really have any cemented rules right now. It's like the Wild West of warfare. So they could, of course, cyber attack the factories, but I don't know what there would be able to cyber attack in those factories that would make it worthwhile, because, they're not really factories like you see in the West where there's a lot of, I guess you could say, computerized components to it. These are like women and children probably working in a sweatshop, putting together a 2-stroke motor and some plastic components to make these shaheds. So I don't really know how effective it would be in, I guess you could say, slowing their operations or their production. So it probably would end up being better to just attack them and destroy them outright with conventional weaponry than to try and conduct a cyber attack on them. Because I have a feeling that those factories and installations probably don't have a lot of computers or computer technology in them that makes them function. But once again, that's just an assumption based off of the state of Iran, which is not that great. And also, it's very interesting. I was just thinking about this. The Islamic Republic of Iran is going to fight the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And that's very interesting when you think about it, because I was just thinking about their official names. They're almost kind of, at least by 1980s terms, when both of these groups started to come into prominence, they would have been on the same page back then, and now they're going to slaughter each other over the water rights. It's It's like they're kind of turning against each other now. It's like, hey, that's not that bad.
You can't really ever make any sense out of the conflicts in the Middle East. They flip on each other so fast, and with really no real, like, reason or like something behind it. It's just a mess in the Middle East when it comes to wars.
It is, and I gotta say, it's insane, especially when you start getting into the background stories of how some of these terrorist groups came to being. Like, a lot of them actually have their roots from Syria, because Bashar al-Assad, who is the dictator of Syria, and he still is the dictator of Syria, at least the parts that he still control, he actually created a lot, and his dad actually created a lot of the terrorist groups we see in the Middle East, because the Assads actually had this concept of a greater Syria, or at least some kind of a Syria, and they were going to take pretty much all of Iraq, a large part of Jordan. They were going to take all of Israel, a decent amount of southern Anatolia, and also parts of Iran to create this, like, Assyria in their heads, and they were going to be the leaders of it. So they founded these terrorist groups to help them further those aims, and then later on, they ended up just causing problems for everyone and themselves, and they never achieved that goal. Which is, like, wild to think that some of these terrorist groups don't even really exist for a good reason. Like, for example, the Kurds, Kurds that, and not to call the Kurds terrorists because everyone knows the story of the Kurds, but the Kurds in southern Anatolia, they're actually completely armed and equipped by the Iranians or the Syrians. Mostly the Syrians, though, and that's kind of a holdover from that whole greater Assyria idea that the Assad family had. And so with that, once again, trying to catch everyone up a little bit up to speed on some of the information and facts about why the Middle East is so messed up, but it's really because everyone kept on founding terrorist groups, thinking that they would be able to control them and they would help to further their own aims, and then the terrorist groups become loose cannons, and no one can control them, and then they just destabilize the region. But with that, we're now going to be moving on from this question segment and the Middle East and back into Ukraine, where we saw in the northeastern area, not really that much happened in frontline development today, and so I'll be showing you all the past 24 hours, and we can see that once again, the Russians have been able to take another, wait a minute, hang on. Oh, wait a minute, this is from yesterday. I was about to be like, this is the place that Ivan III pissed on. We were making that joke yesterday. So nothing has happened today, because the map hasn't even been updated, and that's always something that I'm playing Russian roulette with, because I never really get to see if the map does or doesn't update before the stream. But moving on into the video clip from this area, specifically near Pershno-Trovine, and we saw that the 15th was able to destroy some Russian artillery. And also, my phone is burning hot. And I just realized why. It's because the stream has been running this entire time on my phone. I'm going to turn that off, because it's literally burning my phone up. But we can now see the Gyansin B that the Russians have inside the tree line. And the Ukrainians also see it as well. And we can now see it firing, and we're about to see it get fired. Right there. There it is. It's gone. And also, Matthew, did you notice that the general order got us all the way up to $12.1 thousand?
I did. I was saying in the live chat. I just hadn't said it out loud yet.
Man, that's insane. I gotta say, we're blowing up this fundraiser about as good as the Ukrainians are blowing up these Gyansins. And that says a lot. And so you see another Gyansin down there.
They're highlighting these tanks like you highlight a tornado on a weather radar.
Yeah, they are. They're like, it's a tornado, man. And we can see another Gyansin gone. And with that, that's the end of the clip. But it is absolutely great to see that the Ukrainians in the area, specifically the 15th Brigade, were able to wipe out those Gyansin Bs. We're now going to be moving out of the Northeast, because that's actually all of the news we have from the Northeast tonight. And we're now going to be moving on down into the area of Bakhmut. More so the area of Berestove, where we saw a clip today of the 109th Brigade hitting a Russian soldier. And I gotta tell you, man, these Ukrainians, they hit Russian forces more than a drunk uncle. And so with that, here's the clip.
All right.
And so we can see the Russians down there. We can see them dropping the bomblet. See the bomblet falling right into the dugout, exploding, and it looks like those Russians have been beat. We can now see them crawling out of the hole. And it looks like he's got some toilet paper still stuck to his shoe. Of course, it's not toilet paper. But with that, that's the end of the clip. And great to see that the 109th Brigade was able to make sure to take care of those guys. And they took care of them quite nicely. We're now going to be moving on into the Bakhmut front line around Krasnopolivka, not Krasnopilia, where we saw that the 30th Brigade was able to make a small advance in this area today. We can see the 30th Brigade moving forward through one of the small villages in the area, and now we can hear the epic music beginning as they pass a BMP and dismount. The Ukrainian forces are determined on capturing this trench in this area of the front line. We now see them throwing in a grenade into the dugouts and making sure to clear them. We can now see them back at the bridge that they were at before and throwing a grenade down there. This one exploded a little bit of ways from the bridge. We can see them now firing on the bridge. And it appears that this is a second assault on the bridge. At least from what we can tell. But really quickly, okay, this is a second assault because there are a couple of things that are ending up being different. Yeah, they are throwing it through the holes in the top of the bridge, but the first time they threw it through, this time they just kind of put a charge on top of the bridge and they're blowing it up again. So it appears that they weren't able to push the Russians completely out of this bridge area the first time, and they're now back doing... Nope, wait a minute. Nope, that confirms. This has got to be old footage. There's some different parts in it, though. But we saw the guy once again washing his face with the stale poo-poo water. So with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip and on into the next bit of news on the front lines, because that's actually old footage, just as we're seeing slightly new parts of it. And we're now going to be moving on into the area of Krasna Ura, where we saw that a Mr. B was destroyed. And I got to tell you, man, apparently he wasn't feeling lucky, punk, today. You were feeling lucky. You got him. So nice job, Matthew. I got to say, nice job on taking care of that. But we can see the Mr. B right down there. We see it's about to be gone. It's about to be misted by shrapnel. And we see it being misted by shrapnel right there. And that Mr. B is now out of action.
Oh,
and I love
Mr. B. He's always getting blown up.
Man, I gotta tell you, man, Mr. B is always putting out those videos. I gotta tell you, they're great videos, by the way. But anyways, with that, we're gonna be moving on from that little bit of news in the Krasna Ura area. And we're now gonna be moving a little bit behind the lines because some people insist that the weather is phenomenal in Ukraine right now, and the ground has never been more dry. And to that, I'd have to say, watch this video, and I think you'll change your mind, because this is about the ickiest, muddiest ground I've ever seen. That is a whole M113. It's like sunk in the mud like it's a sea. And so here's the clip. Also, I'm going to mute that. But there's another M113, and there's a T-64BV as well. All of them have sunk into the mud, and they're not moving at all. They have to be recovered by the tank in the video. Now, these are the kinds of weather conditions that will probably never see a Ukrainian offensive occur under, because that's pretty bad. I mean, you know, if you went off-road in these kinds of situations and the ground got churned up enough, the armor is stopping dead in its tracks and it's not moving forward. Even the lighter stuff like an M113 can't even move through it. So I think they're probably waiting for better weather or drier ground conditions before the counteroffensive begins. We're now going to be moving on into the city of Bakhmut itself, where we also saw the 130th continuing on the fight. And I would play the music, but the music is, of course, copyrighted. We now see some fires burning around the city, and we can see them moving through the destroyed areas of Bakhmut, which is pretty much the entire city. We can see them showing the town, showing that they're in it, and we can see them continuing the fight. Now, some people, some critics always say, oh my god, what in the world did they hit that building with? Did he fire? Wait a minute, hang on. Let me go back to this clip. Wait a minute, it looks like he fired a rifle grenade, but there's... Oh, wait a minute, he's just firing his rifle. And then the building just explodes, most likely from a tank shell or something similar. But some critics always say, why in the world do we never play the music? Other guys play music, and they don't get in trouble. I would ask Warner Brothers about that. But we can see right here that the building was completely destroyed, and we can also see the Ukrainian soldiers having a fun time in the basement. Kind of like us. And so with that, that's the end of the clip. And great to see these guys making sure to continue on the fight inside the city of Bakhmut. Because while we haven't heard a lot about the 130th over the course of this war, they are still doing an amazing job in the city of Bakhmut. We're now going to be moving on down to the southern flank, where we saw that a Russian gave himself away on the front lines, and it appears that he started to bring forward some Ukrainian firepower. Also, we hear the clown music. We're going to mute that as well. Yeah, we can see him getting into a little dugout here. We can now see the Russians just kind of chilling, grilling, and the Ukrainians are about to be chilling and killing. 3rd Brigade, of course, keeping a good eye on them. We can see the first shell land up there. We see them taking a good look at the area. And we now see the Russians wandering around the bottom of the tree going, what do we do? Do we run away? And he's going, I don't know, man. Bleed. And so now they're running away. Of course, having given away their position. And they're still being given away right now because we can still see them. And they're trying to run into the larger tree line nearby. I have a feeling this won't be successful for them. But that's where the video clip ends. And once again, very interesting to see that the 3rd Brigade was able to get a couple of them. We're now going to be moving on into the battles around Klishchiivka, where we saw the 24th continuing on the fight and making sure to put pressure on the Russian lines, which at the moment are not moving due to an additional amount of reserves being dedicated to the flanks. So here's the clip. Oh, we're going to mute that. And we can now see the Ukrainians moving forward through the field. We can see that a large amount of the tree lines have been completely decimated by artillery fire, and we can now see the Ukrainians firing onto the Russian trenches that were in the once existent tree line. We can see them continuing to fire at the tree line. And when you see a smoke grenade, it appears, putting out some smoke in this area. We can also see something else smoking right here, but it's not clear if that's a smoke grenade or what. We can now see something exploding around the Ukrainian infantry, and something else again, or that may not be Ukrainian infantry. I can't really tell at this point, because we've lost sight of the Ukrainian infantry earlier in the video. And we now see more grenade explosions occurring somewhere in this area. We can now see smoke coming out of the larger Russian trench work down the distance. Why the hell do I have such a hard time talking sometimes? I don't know. Now we can see some kind of an armored vehicle moving into the area. We haven't been able to identify whether it's Ukrainian or Russian yet. But it is whipping it around that corner, I'll tell you that.
You know, I'm sure it feels like it's going 100 miles an hour on the ground, but it looks slow as hell from the air.
It does, doesn't it? It looks so slow. So this thing is a little smoky, or it's just throwing up dirt from the road, one or the other. Can't really tell which side's vehicle that is, but we can now see it running away from the front lines, it seems, and maybe going back down the road to get out of there. Man, that thing's bucking it this time. Oh, and it turned into a fireball.
Going. Oh, and he went.
Oh, he gone. Gone. I think that was probably a Russian. Nope, it's still going, actually. It just spun out right there for a second. It's still going. And now we can see what appears to be the vehicle burning in the distance a little while later.
He eventually got.
He eventually got. And I think that was a Russian vehicle. And so with that, that's the end of that clip. But once again, absolutely great to see that the 24th Brigade was able to attack Russian positions and inflict losses. We're now going to be moving on to our next clip where we saw a Russian soldier, well, actually it appeared to have been a few of them, were captured in the area as well. Also, we're going to mute this one because it has copyrighted music. But when you see the Russians coming out of the trench works, the first one right there, he's now laying down on the ground. We now see this Ukrainian coming up and taking a look at him. We can see one prisoner right there, and it appears that there's two others over here to the left side. And we see the other two right over there to the left. And we can see the Ukrainians in the background continuing to make sure that the dugout is clear and that there's nobody left inside of it. With that, that's the end of the clip, but we can see that the Ukrainians are still being met with success, at least in this area of the line, against the Russians in head-on fights, but we don't see that translating into any ground gained by Ukrainian forces at this point in the war. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this clip and on to the next one, where we also saw that an ammo dump was destroyed in this area, not that far behind the lines. And so, without further ado, Here's a clip. We can see the area where the ammo dump is, and we can now see the ammo dump explode. Very nice. And so with that, that's the end of the clip. And I love to see it. I'm very happy to see it, that another ammo dump is destroyed. You see, whenever we see these little explosions right here of ammo dumps going up into the sky, what that means is that some Russian unit out there is going to have a difficult time getting some kind of ammunition that they relied on from that ammo dump. And that means that Russians will be having a more difficult time tomorrow, at least in those units that are affected in fighting the Ukrainians. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip of news in the Bakhmut area, and that's actually all the video clips and evidence we got from the Battle of Bakhmut today. Once again, the Ukrainians have been able to make advances over the past couple of weeks, but the reserves that the Russians have brought forward into the area have made this a little bit more difficult going forward. Ukrainian forces are continuing to try and conduct an offensive in the southern direction. We do believe that they control the town of Klishkivka, although that's not shown on Deep State UA, and we also know that they are pushing forward in the northern flank as well, most likely in the direction of Krasnohora. However, we're still not seeing those advances coalescing into any meaningful forward movements at this point, and so we're most likely going to be waiting on the Ukrainian counteroffensive to begin elsewhere before we continue to see movement in this direction again. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from the Bakhmut battlefield into the area of Turetsky and Zhelizhny, where we saw that a Russian drone was shot down in this area by a Stormer HVM. And so with that, here's the clip. We can see them firing off the Stormer Starstreak missile. It is now flying on its way towards the drone. And we now see that thing being smacked and going down. So
they're very humble about it.
They're very humble. They're just like, oh, we got it, yay. So that's the end of the clip, but great to see a Stormer HVM shooting down a drone. We're now going to be moving on into the Donetsk region, and of course, over the past 24 hours, we've not seen any developments in this area, considering that the map hasn't even been updated. And so, moving on into the clip, near Avdiivka, we saw a T-80B being destroyed. T-80B or T-80 not to be? And the answer is not to be. We can see it right here. The engine is on fire. A great way to start off our video. And the tank is smoking. And as y'all know, smoking kills. And we can see it killing right there. Yikes. I guess that Russian tank crew is toasty. And they're gone. And with that, that's the end of the clip. But that's all we got from Avdiivka today. But hey, it's a $3.5 million tank. Who can complain? We're now going to be moving on down into the direction of Donetsk, where we saw some Russian surveillance equipment being blown up in this part of the front lines. Oh, well, let's mute that. That might be copyrighted. We can see the Russian surveillance equipment right here. We can also see a Russian motorcycle right there as well. We can see some Russian guys wandering around, and it appears they spotted the drone. Quick, no time to lose. Let's get shelled. They get shelled.
They looked up at that drone like, what's that?
Hey, what's that thing up there? And we now see that they're getting shelled. And I guess you could say that the Russians are not walking on eggshells. They're getting shelled. That was a crappy joke. But hey, in the bright side, look, their surveillance equipment appears to be damaged.
If you can call that surveillance equipment, that's a stretch.
Dude, honestly, man, that looks like a 2G cell phone tower. And it looks like it's getting slammed still.
It looks like a public TV antenna.
You know what that thing honestly looks like? Looks like a hot poker that they could stick up their own rear ends. Yeah, by the time they're done with it. And so with that, that's the end of the clip. And great to see they're able to get some surveillance equipment today. We're now going to be moving on down into the area of Volodar. Of course, no frontline advances seen here today either, but there was something fairly interesting to be seen nonetheless. In the direction of Volodar, we saw that the Russians once again used incendiary munitions like white phosphorus. This time there was no audio, well, no music in it whatsoever. It was just the raw audio of what incendiary sounds like. And it was fairly interesting because we've never really heard incendiary just completely uninterrupted from the point to where it explodes mid-air to where it lands on the ground and continues to burn. And so we're going to be showing y'all this clip. I'm not going to be talking through it. I'm just going to be letting y'all hear the sound that incendiary makes. And there were no added effects or anything else in this video. You know what? I take that back. That sounds like put in lightning effects. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I was about to say that doesn't sound real.
Because it said it was raw ambience earlier, and I'd like heard that first boom, and I was like, kind of sounds like maybe an artillery shell exploding a little. And then I heard it the second time the exact same way. I was like, nah, I'm calling cap. Yep. Yep. That's a sound effect, no doubt about it. Well, it's always nice to hear the raw sound of incendiary.
The raw sound of special effects.
And here comes another one. I'm very certain of it. Come on, fourth thunder strike. Come on. And there's the actual sound.
That sounds more like it.
Віас на зв'язку. Піднімаю всіх.
Піднімай всіх.
Да, плюс.
Піднімайте всіх. Да, плюс прийняв.
It's very quiet once it starts hitting the ground. You don't really hear the stuff. It just sits down there and burns. And it doesn't really burn for that long either. It just burns for maybe like 20 seconds, it seems. Of course, it's still hot after the light of it fades away, but it doesn't burn visibly for that long, which is fairly interesting to see. With that, we're going to be moving on from the area of Volodar and on out of that part of the front and on towards Arikiv, where we saw that 2 grads were destroyed today in the southern direction. And so, without further ado, here's a clip. When you see the first grad being hit right there, smoke coming out of it, and we can also see the rockets apparently firing off inside of their tubes after being damaged. And we now see a second MLRS being hit as well. You see that one rocket was fired off there. It may have been one that may have been damaged, who really can tell. But with that, that's the end of the clip, and we saw 2 direct strikes near to the grads, of course making sure to cause a pretty decent amount of damage. With that, we're now going to be showing you all a drive-by looting, where we saw some Russian guys who were running a Russian army supply truck, hopping out and stealing crap out of the back of another truck on the side of the road in Crimea. Here's a clip. When you see the military truck right here, marked with a V, and you see this guy going, get me closer, yeah, baby, let's take the box split. So he just takes the box. It looks like it may actually be liquor inside of that thing. And of course, we all know that that's a prime target for stealing. And now they just slowly roll by. A drive-by robbing. Who would have ever thought? The Americans made the drive-through restaurant. The Russians have made the drive-through stealing. And I've got to say, I think this is going to start having drastic implications on the Russian economy and Russian car culture. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that clip and on up into Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky. And so, without further ado, here's that speech.
Speech!
And it's a juicy one.
Сьогодні наша держава пройшла через одну із найбільших російських атак шахедами одночасно. 54 дрони. Майже всі вони збиті. Майже. На жаль, є влучання на Житомирщині. Зробимо все, щоб допомогти, щоб відновити зруйноване. Але все ж більшість руйнувань вдалося відвернути. Більшість життів, які могли забрати ці шахеди, вдалося зберегти. Я дякую кожному і кожній, хто це забезпечив. Зенітні ракетні війська та авіація повітряних сил, протиповітряна оборона сухопутних військ та наші мобільні вогневі групи. Дякую вам, воїни. Під час цієї терористичної атаки кількісно найпотужніший удар був спрямований саме проти Київщини. В межах міста Київ та області збито 36 дронів. Саме так Росія відзначає День нашого древнього Києва. За свою історію Київ бачив різні підлості від загарбників, пережив їх усіх, переживе і рашистів. Жодного із них тут не буде. Київ та всі наші міста, вся наша Україна поставить крапку в історії московської деспотії, яка дуже довго і дуже різним народам несла поневолення. Її не врятують ані шахеди, ані будь-які інші засоби терору, які вона принизливо шукає по світу. Бо сила, вона в людях, вона в містах, вона у житті. А коли зневажають і життя, і людей, і найбільш вагомі для культури міста, буде тільки програш. Програш для Росії. І навіть сотні шахедів від цього її не врятують. Лише додадуть ганьби Росії. Цими днями ми вітаємо із Днем міста Київ та Олександрію, Сєвєродонецьк, Калуш, Кривий Ріг. Міста не однакової долі, але однакової нашої поваги, нашої України, нашої віри у те, що ми пройдемо цей надзвичайно тяжкий етап історії. Пройдемо, і будуть всі наші міста вільними, а люди захищеними від будь-якого зла, що може загрожувати нашій державі. Сьогодні я хочу подякувати усім нашим людям, які бились і б'ються заради України, усім нашим воїнам, усім видам Збройних сил і родам військ, кожній бригаді, кожному підрозділу. Дякую вам, усім, хто в бою, усім, хто на бойових завданнях, усім, хто на бойових постах. І дякую усім, без кого не уявити ефективного опору держави, ефективного захисту наших міст. Дякую кожному і кожній, хто тренує наших воїнів та хто відновлює їх після поранень, хто виробляє і постачає зброю, хто забезпечує нашу логістику та зв'язок. Дякую усім, хто забезпечує Україну розвідувальною інформацією та хто поширює світом правду про війну і російський терор. Дякую кожному і кожній, хто забезпечує наші рятувальні операції після ворожих ударів та ліквідовує їхні наслідки. Дякую кожному у світі, хто не байдужий і хто хоче перемоги свободи, так само, як і ми. Всі наші енергетики і транспортники. Дякую вам. Укрзалізниця, Оборонпром, всі наші волонтери, Юнайтед 24 і амбасадори. Дякую. Наші правоохоронці, місцева влада, працівники, працівниці комунальних підприємств, наша освіта, наші діячі культури, наші історики, усі, хто зберігає робочі місця та усі, хто створює робочі місця попри все. Наші фермери, працівники нашого агросектору, наша промисловість, айтішники, наші державні службовці, наші дипломати. Дякую усім, хто зміцнює нашу оборону, нашу державу, наших людей. Те, що наша столиця вільна, те, що наші міста захищаються достойно, те, що ми звільнимо кожне нині окуповане місто. Все це заслуга багатьох людей, всіх, хто воює і працює заради України. Це заслуга нашого могутнього народу, який вміє робити історичні речі, коли об'єднаний, коли усвідомлює свою силу, коли нічого не пробачає ворогові і коли надихає увесь світ. І йдемо вперед, поки не звільнимо всю нашу українську землю. Боронимо кожне місто, дбаємо про одне одного і пам'ятаємо про всіх наших людей, яких ми маємо повернути додому, до своїх міст і сіл з російської неволі. Слава нашому прекрасному народу, слава усім, хто дбає про нашу державу. Слава Україні!
And Slava
Heroes
Ukraini.
Slovo.
And that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on the 459th day of the war. And before we move into the interesting questions and answers that all of y'all have given tonight to some of the leading questions of the night, we have something special that we must do before we start to talk about what all of y'all have been thinking and saying tonight. There was a interesting viewer, one that we'll note by name, the Snack Squad TV, that came in several days ago and decided that they would try and best us on our stream, and of course, if you know the story, you know, by sending in a $100 super chat and trying to continue to harass us on our own live stream. Back on that day, we made a specific note that we would make sure to take that $100 and instead of taking it as support to help us to keep this thing running, we were going to take it and put it towards the Sunday night's fundraiser, which we have not done yet tonight. We were wanting to make sure to make a special segment for this as well, especially considering the, I guess you could say, defamatory claims that this specific person has made against our fundraisers. And so we are going to be putting their $100 towards this fundraiser as well, because maybe then they can actually help out Ukraine. And so let me go and put my $100 in. Well, actually, I'm sorry, not my $100. It's actually their $100. Let me go and put that in. Right there. And y'all should be seeing that here in the live chat here in a second.
And
it will pop up. It's going to be 30 seconds earlier for them from when they hear us saying this. But
Hey,
there we
there
have
it
it
goes.
right there.
That's the best place for it.
The best place for it. And of course, we had to make a special mention for that because we wanted everyone to see it as best as they could, visible for the entire world as we continue to fundraise for Ukraine. And we've seen right here that we've been able to raise $12,432 tonight so far, and of course it's not over yet. That fundraiser could continue on to reach for the sky and go on to unbelievable heights, but it has already made it well on into space as far as our fundraisers go. It has made it to $12,432 raised in support of Ukraine. And that is absolutely unbelievable to think that tonight, once again, the entirety of the Lee Spring Army has been able to gather around and help to raise $12,400. If anyone had ever asked me when this stream started on day one of the war on February 24th here on my local time of 2022, that I would have been able to run a fundraiser this late into a war, 459 days in, and raise $12,400 in the attempt to save the to help save the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, I would have told them that that would have been outright silly, because there would have been no way in hell that this channel would have ever blown up, and there would have been no way that a community would have stayed that cohesive for that long to be able to make these fundraisers possible. And yet, both of those things I would have been proven wrong on, because today is proof of that very thing being wrong. In fact, before this channel ever blew up, neither of us really had a concept of YouTube ever being able to do anything. We never had the idea that the Lee Spring Army would ever exist. We never had an idea that all of y'all would be able to come together here and do so much good in support of Ukraine. We never had any idea that any of this would happen. And I've got to say that I am the most fortunate person to in the world, in my opinion, to know that we have such an amazing community that's so dedicated to the cause of helping out Ukraine and helping to save the lives of people that most of us have probably never even met or not even familiar with. Yet every single Sunday we all come together to make sure to help them out as best as possible. And so thank you all so much once again for helping out with this fundraiser. It's been absolutely amazing. And of course, to pay a tribute to all of the amazing people here in the Lee Spring Army who have helped to make this fundraiser possible, let's get into what y'all have been thinking and saying tonight about some of the leading questions of the night, and also answer some of y'all's questions directly. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so moving back into our polls, our very first one says, Ukraine reiterates its request for security guarantees as it works toward NATO membership, and what are your thoughts? 75% said they should be granted to Ukraine, 9% said unsure, 3% said, I'm indifferent on this one, and 14% said it's irrelevant, it's de facto now. And I will say I'm with the 14%. I think it's de facto right now. Ukraine basically has security guarantees from the West at this point because we're supplying them with a ton of equipment and weaponry. But, you know, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and just make it formal since we're already basically doing that. And if it makes Ukraine feel better, might as well do it. I don't see the harm in it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that we like Matthew said, we've largely given them kind of, it's like a quasi security guarantee, because supplying them with arms isn't necessarily a security guarantee, but I think we should give them a official security guarantee that the nation of Ukraine will exist and it will not be possible to snuff the thing out. Otherwise, we'll get involved and make sure that they continue to exist in one way, shape, or form. And of course, some people may also take that the wrong way, and that saying that we give them a security guarantee means that they'll have their 2014 borders security guarantee. And that's not necessarily the case, at least in a way. We will largely just be guaranteeing that the Ukrainian government survives. And so that is, in its own right, a security guarantee going here forward, that the Russians won't be able to gain more ground or territory without facing the probability of having the United States begin to get involved in direct form, or the Western world as a whole. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says Erdogan won re-election in Turkey, and will there be short-term changes in Turkey's policy toward Ukraine? It looks like 34% said no, Erdogan will remain consistent. 21% said possibly but unlikely. 25% said yes, Erdogan is pro-Putin, and 20% said unsure. And I'm with the 34%. I personally don't think Erdogan is going to change any policies simply because he got re-elected. I kind of saw this coming. We said last night that Erdogan will probably win this runoff election, and it turns out he did. So, not really shocking. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that Erdogan, and I wish we could get some results here. I'm trying to figure out the numbers. So let's see if we can get some. With more than 99% of the ballot boxes open, unofficial results from competing news agencies showed Erdogan with 52% of the vote, compared with 48% for his challenger, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Unfortunately, I can't really pronounce that name too well, and I'm sure I'm butchering it anyways. It was actually a very close election. He only won by 4% of the vote, which, as far as all of his elections have gone, and let me go pull up. No, we do not want that. Turkish election history. And let me show you all the history of Turkey's elections so far, if we can get a list of them, and show you all who won. So, let's go here to, let's see, can we get the modern elections? So let me go find his part.
Who needs results?
So, dang it, man. Where are the results? Let's see.
Hey, there it is. It's a parliamentary election. Never mind.
Yeah, dang, man. They're not going to give us the modern results. Oh, come on. All right, so those are the parliamentary elections. Here are the let's see. Those are the presidential elections. And then there's Ataturk. Once again, our boy Ataturk. His last name in Turkish actually means father of the Turks, if y'all don't know. And he also never had any kids either. So he is the only person in Turkey who had the last name Ataturk, father of the Turks.
Ataturk.
Yeah, hey, Ataturk. that's what I always say whenever my Turkish friend does something I approve of. I always go, hey, Ataturk. And then he goes, I would kill you, man. I would get you. But let's see here. So, of course there were a couple of coups in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but we're trying to get to the modern elections. And I'm not seeing the parts... Oh, so wait a minute. What the hell? What, am I stupid? I sat there and started reading Erdogan's name, and I read Recep Tayyip, and for some reason it didn't translate that his last name's Erdogan. Sorry, y'all, but anyways, up until 2007, and let me make sure he previously... Oh, what party was this fella here? Let me make sure I got his party right, and he's a member of parliament, re-elected. Initially a member of the Islamist Welfare Party, joined the Virtue Party, and then Erdogan is, of course, a member of the AKP, the Justice and Development Party, which became a big deal in modern Turkish times. So it appears that if we can get the 2014 results, as you can see here, he won by a fairly big margin next to the leading competitor, I guess you could say. The next runner-up got 38% of the vote. He got 52% of the vote, nearly. So the gap in between the two of them, I would say, is at least 15 points, trying to do the math as a rough estimate. In the 2018 Turkish election, we can see that once again, he's slaughtered compared to everyone else with 53% of the vote, and the next nearest candidate was around 22% behind him. This time, however, they were only 4 points away during this election, and from 52% to 48%. And that's clearly starting to show that his grip as president of Turkey is beginning to wane. And most likely when the next election cycle comes around in, I believe it would be 2027, 2028, I would assume, he may lose because it seems as though he's starting to wane in popularity in a one way, shape, or form. So I don't think their policies are going to be changing on Ukraine because everyone has to remember he is the one who has been in charge of Turkey during this entire war, and the Turks have ended up supporting the Ukrainians a great deal, and I don't think that's going to be changing as the war carries on, especially considering that the leadership hasn't changed either. I think that either way in Turkey, the election really didn't matter as far as Ukraine support went because regardless whether Erdogan won or the other guy won, the support for Ukraine was going to end up being the same from Turkey because they went more towards being a NATO country or a European country again outside of the AKP party. They were going to support Ukraine because that's an EU NATO thing, and Erdogan once again trying to make Turkey its own sphere of influence in the region was going to support Ukraine because that benefited their interest for that aim. So either way, Ukraine was going to end up being supported. So I don't think anything is going to change because of Erdogan being reelected. And also, I really honestly would love, and I think we may actually. Well, no, actually we're not. I'm sorry, that sounded like a door squeaking right there when I did that. Yeah, hey, can you close that door for me? But anyways, I don't think we'll be going into that anytime soon because I would really itch to go into the politics of foreign countries like Turkey, to be honest with y'all. I would love to give y'all the lay of the land and kind of tell y'all what both sides are, just like lay it out, like in their own words each, what they are and what they stand for and everything. Because it's always very interesting to get into that stuff, especially for a country like Turkey, because compared to a lot of Western countries, their politics are not Middle Eastern politics, they're not Western politics, they're truly their own kind of political world, and it's very interesting to try and get into and try and understand because it has a completely different dynamic than most other political spheres, especially in the Western world. But we have a no politics rule. Even if it isn't applicable to Western politics, we like to enforce that and make sure that we don't talk about politics in any way, shape, or form. So we won't be doing that anytime in the near future. But it is still an interesting subject, and so with that, hope that does address that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. And our next poll says Putin has ordered that the Russian border be strengthened, and with the counteroffensive looming, can Russia actually afford this? 50% said no, Russia is stretched too thin. 24% said not really, but possibly. 19% said yes, Russia can transfer the troops, and 7% said unsure. And I am definitely within the 50%. I think Russia is stretched way too thin, and they really can't afford moving these troops off the front line and to go back and strengthen the Russian border. I think Putin is prioritizing propaganda in this instance over actual strategy because I think he intends to use this as a way to fire up the Russians by showing them that their borders are in danger by putting the troops there. But Enforcer, what say you?
I have to be honest with you, Matthew. I want you to buy my ghost book here, and it appears that the southern Russian border is being invaded. We need stronger border security.
Oh, dear.
Dear. And by the way, I just have to make this clear. That's not, getting into politics or anything. I'm just doing a voice impersonation of someone y'all may know. Someone y'all may know somewhere out there. It's not supposed to be reflecting anything. I'm just doing it, so, don't take that personally or anything. But I would say that he probably is using it for that aim because making the Russian borders look weak, it starts to make this war kind of change perspective from being an offensive war into Ukraine to a defensive war to defend Russia, which may be more popular in the public's eye in Russia, and will continue to make sure that they support the war effort. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, I don't know why, but somebody said please ban me, so I guess I'll have to oblige. I'm not sure why they started that. Made no sense. I mean, I always love to comply with requests like that, so there you go. But up next, we have our last poll, which says, I forgot I took a picture of this when I was looking at my screen and put my phone up. Why did I do that? I'm getting old. Let's see.
What happened?
I live in my basement. I can barely talk. Literally. But anyways, our last poll says Ukraine's star tennis player refused to shake hands with Belarusian opponent after defeat. And what are your thoughts? 48% said good decision, give no respect. 27% said, I can kind of see both sides of this. 9% said unsure, and 16% said poor decision and not sensible. And for me, I'm going to actually be within the 16%. I think that was a poor decision. It does not make Ukraine look good. If the objective here was to protest the Belarusians playing in the sports because Belarus supports Russia, then they simply should not have shown up and gone and competed against the person. If you're going to show up and compete and then you get defeated, not to shake the other person's hand, that's kind of low, in my opinion at least. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it is a little bit of poor sportsmanship, it would seem, to do something like that. But I can also understand where he's coming from a little bit.
I think it's a she.
Oh, it's a she?
I think so.
I'm talking about this having not known anything about it until this poll, to be completely honest with you. So I would say that I understand that, the thing behind it, but it is a little bit of poor sportsmanship as well. And one always has to remember there is a bit of a decorum and sportsmanship that has to be followed through, no matter the animosity in between a few countries. So I would have to say, honestly, I'd have to remain undecided on that one, because I get where they're coming from, but at the same time, it is a little bit of poor sportsmanship. And hey, speaking of which, we went to Topgolf today, and I gotta tell you, not to brag or anything, but Matthew and me were hitting out to the blue and the white. I mean, like a good deal. If y'all don't know what Topgolf...
Tell them how many points I won by.
Oh, man, Matthew won by, like, I think 1,000 points or something. I'll show you all the Topgolf plays. And how? Let me go find it real quick, though. Here it is. Here's the Topgolf thing. So you can't see it here, but these are red. These are yellow, this one's green, that one's orange, this one's blue, that one's white, and then there's this little strip back here that if you hit into, it's like 217 points or something like that, and you hit the balls from inside of this little pavilion area. So we hit the balls, and they would end up flying, that sounded so wrong, but he hit the ball, and it would end up flying out here into the orange one right here, or the blue one, and we also got it out into the white a couple of times too. And then one time, our dad was able to swing it, and he got all the way out here to 217. It was the longest shot that anyone ever made in our group today. It was really cool. But yeah, we had a lot of fun playing golf today. Well, more so at the driving range thing today at Topgolf. But still, if you're in the area, make sure to have some fun. It was really fun, actually, and I'm getting better at driving at least. Nobody messed with it. Well, actually, Matthew messed with the irons, and we decided that was a bad idea, so we put it back after, like, one swing. But we did have a lot of fun, like, getting our drive down, and hopefully we'll eventually be able to play golf well, at least with our drive. I don't think we'll be well with irons or anything like that. But anyways, but yeah, Matthew did win by a massive margin. He won by, like, 1,200 points.
Hello, Dick.
And we're talking about like a score that was already in the thousands. I think it made it to like 2,300. He was like at 4,000 or something like that. It was crazy. But still, with that, I hope that does address that side note fairly well about the whole sports thing. Just kind of weighing into the little bit of sports we play. We also enjoy tennis. We don't, of course, we don't play any of this like a lot, or getting to the point where it'd be like semi-professional. Obviously not. We're not that good. But well, actually, I'm not that good. I'm not going to talk for Matthew on that one, because he's actually pretty good at, like...
I'm a middleweight.
Yeah, he's a middleweight with golf for sure. But tennis is also pretty fun, too. Those are kind of like the two sports we, like, enjoy playing a bit. But I got to be honest with y'all, I'm not really that big of a fan of a lot of sports. I'm just a fan of golf and tennis because, for some reason, they kind of click and they're enjoyable, especially with the right kind of people around. And so with that, we are on to the next one. I hope we addressed that poll fairly well.
All right. And also, by the way, shameless plug, I did post a picture. I rarely ever do it on Patreon of us going out there.
Hey, you're not supposed to trust the Patreon. That's just a video thing and Twitter thing.
Oh, well, I mean, there you go. It's on the Patreon.
Oh, what the hell? But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
And with that being said, we are all out of polls. So we are moving into our live chat questions, and we've already gone over the Morse code of the stream. So we're going to be moving on to Portstan's question from the live chat. He says, please ask the Enforcer how Prigozhin can get away with calling Putin a bunker coward.
We really don't know how he's getting away with that. At least on the little political posters he's putting up in Belgorod. We don't really know how he's getting away with that. I have a feeling it won't be for long. But you have to remember, the Russians do take a little bit of time to react to stuff like that. So he's getting away with it for now, but who's to say he gets away with that forever? So, to be honest, he's getting close to getting the window treatment. I think that's probably going to be the thing that tips it over. And if it doesn't, I'll be pretty surprised. That'll be a first in Russian history. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to underscore, who says, "Do you think the Taliban is going to war with Iran because they do not want them to proceed with their nuclear ambitions?"
I think the Taliban is actually going to be on the defensive in this conflict because the Iranians are the ones actually attacking them for water rights, which is still kind of wild to think that the Islamic republics and emirates are fighting each other over water rights. But that's kind of what happens. If y'all don't know what happened after the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, there were multiple different Islamic factions that rose up inside of Afghanistan, and it would end up being the Taliban, which was kind of formed out of all the fighting, that would come to the forefront. And the Taliban is kind of like a coalition of a lot of the groups that were in Afghanistan at that time, but the largest of the groups was the Mujahideen, which still exists in Afghanistan to this day, and is probably one of the largest and most important of the Islamic groups that exists in Afghanistan. So I would say it's most likely going to be the Iranians attacking the Afghans for water. It has nothing to do with nuclear ambitions. Honestly, I have a feeling the Afghans could really care less about Iran's nuclear ambitions, or anything for that matter, because they are very bad on the administrative side of things. They hardly get administration down in Afghanistan at all, and it's a very small area that they have any kind of administrative power. So I have a feeling that's probably not extending on into an international sphere hardly at all.
Could they do us a solid since we gave them all that equipment and go ahead anyway?
I mean, yeah. I mean, they kind of could. But who knows? Anyways, with that, and also a lot of that equipment, like the Humvees, has actually ended up rotting in its place because they have some of them don't really know how to maintain it, and also they don't have any spare parts or equipment to replace stuff that breaks down. So a lot of the Humvees have just ended up rotting in their places where they were left.
I don't know, man. I've seen some of those Taliban absolutely dripped out with some American gear.
Well, yeah, they can get the clothes, sure. I mean, like the clothes that they don't break down, but the vehicles do break down, and so they can't really, they can't really use any of that stuff. And also, I heard someone say, "Oh my God, we left I think it was like we left Hellfire missiles." It's like, do you really expect some guy who doesn't know how to read, who just came out of the mountains of Kamdesh, to learn how to operate a Hellfire on his own? It's like it takes months of training in the U.S. military for someone to learn how to do that. You expect this guy to somehow get his hands on a manual, not even able to read his own native language, and somehow learn to read English, and then also have a weapon system you can hook that thing up to that is still operational, and be able to fire off that Hellfire at something in the distance, and be able to guide it in and hit it, having absolutely no experience beyond, I guess you could say, almost medieval lifestyle in the mountains of Afghanistan. It's like, I honestly doubt that would be possible. In my opinion, that's probably why we left the equipment behind, because it was probably too expensive to bring it back, and we also knew they'd probably never get the ability or learn how to use it. Unless the Chinese step in. That might be a different story, but the Chinese are probably never going to step in, because the Afghan-Chinese relations, while okay, are not really great. Although they are giving them a loan. And so with that, we're on to the next one. I hope we addressed that fairly well, at least in my opinion.
All right. And up next, we have a question from David Huss, who says, "Do you think Ukraine will be successful in a counterattack in Bakhmut as Wagner pulls out and the inexperienced Russian troop move in?"
I would say that the Ukrainians are probably going to have an easier time in central Bakhmut due to the Wagner pulling out. The Wagner was a little bit battle experienced, of course, still poorly trained, but had some battle experience, so they had a little bit of an idea how to operate on the front lines. The units they're bringing in now, from what we understand, are green and have no frontline experience, so they will be far easier to deal with, at least for the first few months they're there. And then they'll probably still be easy anyways, because they are nothing more than conscripts. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, I saw JD Macco 23 say LSA golf, and it got me thinking. You remember today when I was trying to drive that ball down the range? I said, watch this drive, like George Bush said when he was asked at the golf course.
Yeah.
And then I absolutely yeeted that ball into the net above me, into the person's bay.
Dude, it went it went straight up into space. I was like, oh, dude, remember that
dear.
Remember that one time that I said, bada swing, and I went bing, and that thing went all the way out into the white. Like, that was the one time I made it into the white. That was the only time.
Oh, I made it out there to the white a little while, but no, that was, whenever you hype yourself up for golf, like you think you're going to hit a really long drive, you typically screw up in spectacular fashion.
Oh, in a terrible way.
Don't ever imitate George Bush and say, "Watch this drive." You're going to screw up for sure.
Man, I'm telling you, that was the funniest script too. Remember when? Let me think of another funny incident that happened there. Remember when I put all of my power into that drive, and all you heard was, and then it only went 50 yards. I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, that was so weird because Matthew could tell you, I think I was swinging so hard the club was probably bending in air, and then I hit it and it didn't go anywhere. I was like, what the hell is up with this? I was like, this is bull. I want a refund on that one. But yeah, that was a really fun time today. I really enjoyed it. Just in case y'all were wondering. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next question goes to Nicholas Condor, who says, "What effect might the Afghani Taliban attack on Iran have on the supply of ammo and drones to Russia?"
It may have an impact, and actually we have to change the wordage here because it's not an Afghan attack. I'm sorry if y'all are basing the question off of what I said earlier, because I was actually misinformed. It's actually the Iranians attacking the Afghans, so it's the other way around. And if the Iranians continue to attack the Afghans and the situation begins to become more serious, we could probably start to see that the Iranians start limiting their orders, I guess you could say their export orders of weapons to Russia, so that way they can use them against the Afghans. That may be entirely within the realm of possibility if that begins to heat up into a whole-scale war over water supply. But I will say this, probably expect that war not to be as large or as grand as the Iran-Iraq war. It's certainly not going to be. The Iranians would probably, because in all honesty, the Iranians do outweigh the Afghans considerably in arms, weapons, equipment, and ability. So it would probably be a one-sided fight for the Iranians. Not, of course, the Russo-Ukraine war showed us that just because a country is smaller in size in most regards doesn't mean that it's going to be steamrolled. But at the same time, considering that the Afghans, from what we know, really have no official training for their military at all, the Iranians are a step above them, at least in troop quality. So the Iranians would probably start to push across the Afghan border into these open plains around Zaranj and Kandahar, and the Afghans would probably end up giving concessions and allowing practically unlimited water flow into Iran, and that would probably appease them. So it won't be as big or as grand a war as the Russo-Ukrainian war has turned into, or the Iran-Iraq war was, but it probably will be a pretty heated one where the Iranians start using a lot of the equipment they otherwise would have exported to try and hit the Afghans instead. And so with that, hope that does address that question fairly well, at least in my opinion. And once again, there's many ways it could turn out, but that's how I think it would most likely turn out. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Forgotten Promise, who says, "I believe Russia is being supplied with munitions, and do you agree?"
I would agree Russia is being supplied with munitions from Iran and most likely North Korea, but I would have to say, as far as every other country goes, we haven't really seen enough proof or verification to show they are being supplied with arms from other countries rather than North Korea and Iran. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. I would agree with you, though, on that statement. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to White Lightning 777, who says, "We need to send ATACMS and Tomahawks. That's the only language that Putin understands, and hit the Kremlin. And what are your thoughts?"
Man, hitting the Kremlin. I got to tell you, I'm all for attacking the Russian government directly, but I've got to be honest with y'all. The Kremlin is a historic structure, and it kind of does feel like it's a bit of a disservice to try and attack and possibly destroy the Kremlin. Because, it is a historic site. It's a historic location that's been around, I believe, since the 17th or 16th century, if I'm correct. And I'm never really one for saying to destroy historical structures, even if they are the structures of an enemy country like Russia. Because once they're destroyed, they'll never come back. And if they do come back, it'll be a replica of what was originally there, and everyone will know it, and it doesn't really have the same kind of historical value. So I would say yes to attacking the Russian government. I wouldn't really be that big of a fan of destroying the Kremlin, though, because it is a historic structure. Now, supplying ATACMS to the Ukrainians and Tomahawks, I would say yes to ATACMS, because that would allow them to attack even further into Russian-occupied territory, but no to Tomahawks, because Tomahawks would most likely only be used to attack inside of Russia, and then that could directly insinuate that the United States is involved in the war, which is something we've been trying to avoid the implication of for the entirety of the war so far. So I hope that does address all parts of that question fairly well, at least in my opinion, because that's, once again, my opinion, and we can agree to disagree, or we can agree to agree. So I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one. And also, I see some people saying to each the war in war there is nothing off limits. I have to say, though, there is things that are off limits, because whenever we see the Russians going out of their way to attack Ukrainian historic structures, that is a punch in the gut. One, because it's a historic structure important to Ukraine, and two, is a historical structure, period. And so destroying them causes cultural damage and cultural destruction that cannot be reversed. And I believe that on everything. I believe it's wrong to attack buildings like the British Parliament building, which is the Palace of Westminster. I think attacks upon a building like that are a crime against humanity in its own right, because it's almost the erasure of hundreds of years of history with the single falling and explosion of a bomb. And I don't think that's anything that I would really ever support, as the destruction of historic structures and buildings, because I'm a history major. That's my whole thing. I'm a big history nerd and a geek, and I know that once you destroy that stuff, from there forward for hundreds of years afterwards, all people can say is, oh, you know, it was there at one point, but it's not there for you to see anymore. Like, for example, there's actually a building down here at this exact place. It's called Whitehall now, and in this area, there used to be a palace called Whitehall Palace. It hardly exists to this day. Really, the only parts that are left is the household cavalry building and the banqueting house on the other side of the street. But way back in the day, this actually used to be an entire full-scale palace, almost the size or even larger than Buckingham Palace. And let me see if I can pull this up for y'all. Whitehall Palace, or the Palace of Whitehall. So let me see if I can get y'all a picture of that. So this is what the Palace of Whitehall, in illustration, if I can find y'all a larger one. This is what it would have looked like a long time ago, way back in the day. That's what Whitehall Palace looked like, and every single part of it has been destroyed except for two pieces. This one right here, which is now the Horse Guards Parade Grounds building, which you could see right here, and then the banqueting house right across the street, which is actually, if we can try and point it out, it's kind of like this building right here. And this was an impressive palace and really a historic structure, but it was destroyed, I believe, in the 1700s for the most part, and very few parts of it still stand. And now, when I want to talk about it, instead of it being there for the public to see for the rest of all time and being a cultural heritage site for the British, now all I can do is show y'all an illustration of it and say, this existed at one time, but it was destroyed. So I hope y'all are kind of seeing, like, my point of not really wanting to destroy historic structures, because from that point forward, you can never look at them. All you can do is just say it existed at one point. It's not around anymore. But with that...
Yeah, just like our old White House. Actually, can we have that back?
Yeah, actually, that was burned to the ground. But back then, when it was burned to the ground, it was a relatively new building. It was only like 10 years old. And it was burned out down to only the foundation and the walls still, I guess you could say, existing. And then we rebuilt the entire interior over again. So if you ever go to the White House, that's not the original interior. That's actually the interior from around the 1820s or so. And then even then in the 1950s, practically the entire interior of the building was gutted. And then they rebuilt it again in the 1950s. And let me see if I can find you all a picture of that.
I'm personally glad they burned it down. We needed the insurance money.
Let's see. Yeah, rebuilding of White House. Let me see if I can show you all this. So here's the images. And here is the inside of the White House in the late 1940s. They tore
and this
out...
was a chance to build all that secret stuff underneath the building.
And it was. It was the perfect chance.
It was.
And they tore out everything. So when you go into the White House now and they go, oh my God, this is the bedroom that Lincoln slept in. No, it's not. It's the rebuilt room from like the 1950s again. That was never there. Like, you know, the original room that Abraham Lincoln slept in is gone. It was rebuilt and it's a fabrication of the room he originally slept in. At this point in time, they could have actually completely redesigned the interior of the White House, which I honestly think, once again, is a historical disservice. Because, like, hell, like, think about it. You can't actually go into the original White House that existed all the way through the times of Lincoln, through the times of the Reconstruction, through the times of Teddy Roosevelt. All of that original authenticity of the White House is gone, and it was replaced with something that was a reconstruction of it in the 50s. And I don't like the idea of that either. You know, just my personal opinion. But with that, hope we address that fairly well again. Not to like lecture about the historical significance of buildings or anything, but I'm a really strong advocate of maintaining historical buildings. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next question goes to McLovin You Tonight, who says, did you see the Russian analysts get threatened on the propaganda show from the Russian media monitor?
No, I didn't. I didn't hear about that. But I'll be trying to look into that after the stream if I can. And so, unfortunately, I have to declare ignorance on that for now, but I will be looking into it. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Anthony Riley, who says, have you seen the 40mm grenade mortar that Ukraine has developed?
If you're talking about the 40mm grenade mortar, I think we may have at some point. We have seen all of the 40 mils that have been provided by the West, like the Mark 19 and so on. We have seen those, but I don't think I've seen one that was purpose-built by the Ukrainians specifically. So, to be honest, I'd say no, I haven't, at least from memory, but maybe we have. I'm not really sure. But with that, hope that does address that fairly well. And holy moly, Matthew, we reached 13K! And I'm telling you, this fundraiser was doing incredible. And I gotta thank y'all once again.
Excellent.
Damn, okay. I gotta thank y'all once again for reaching $13,000. That is $3,000 over the third goal we set tonight. We were originally at 5,000, then we went up to 7,500, then we went up to 10, and now we're up to 13. That's amazing. And it's incredible. We're helping out a whole load of people through Revive Soldiers of Ukraine. And I got to thank y'all once again for making that possible. And so with that, we're on to the next one. I also want to thank the folks who made that possible, because while y'all's names will not ever be known from tonight onwards, because sadly he's not letting us know who's donating to the fundraiser, I do want to thank y'all so much as being parts of the Lee Spring Army and making this fundraiser tonight possible and getting it all the way up to $13,000. And so with that, hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a comment from SH Games, who says, should we preserve Nazi historical sites? Should we kiss the ground that Hitler walked on? Should we have left his statues? And what about the Stalins? I think that's an effing bad take.
Well, dang, okay, that's a really strong and rude way to put it, effing bad take. There's a little bit of a difference, though. You see, I don't think you're understanding here. Back when that was happening, that's not a historical site. And that's relatively new, like the Reich Chancellery. You know what? The Reich place. We'll call it that. It was built in the 30s. And so when the U.S. comes rolling through and the Soviets come rolling through in 44 and 45 and start denazifying these structures, they're not historic. They're like 10 years old. There's nothing new. There's nothing old or historic about that building. It's brand new. So, no, there is no reason to sit there and try and preserve those buildings or maintain them in that state, because there's nothing historic about them at that point. There is a historic significance to buildings that has survived for over 200 years. Then they become a historic building. But if you sit there and make something and it's only 5 years old and someone comes through and wants to destroy it or get rid of the symbology on that stuff, there's nothing wrong with that, because it's not a historic building. So that doesn't make any sense. I get where you're coming from with that, but that absolutely makes no sense whatsoever, because you see, the Kremlin wasn't built by Stalin or Hitler or anyone. It was actually built under, I believe, one of the czars of Russia during the 16th century, and it's existed for hundreds of years and has been maintained in a fairly historical state. So it's a completely different perspective. And on top of that, are we going to, and I have to be honest with this. There's also a lot, well, actually, all throughout history, there's not such a thing as a person with a perfect track record anywhere. Everyone has flaws. And are we going to start going through a time in history where we destroy literally everything from the past, because everyone was a terrible person, and there's no such thing as a great person, especially looking back on history, because you can find something to deride on everyone? Are we going to start going back and destroying literally everything about everyone's heritage, culture, and existence to make a change? And also, I know where this is going, because now I know someone's about to ask, well, what about the Confederate States, and what about other statues? There's a little bit of a difference there as well, because a lot of those statues were not put up during the war, they were put up during Reconstruction, and if you look at a lot of them, they have specific connotations to them. It would be one thing if they were put up during the war. It's another thing when they're put up after the war. So, there's a little bit of a difference there as well, not to try and get into the direct statements on that.
Here's my take. To me, I think that people can read about things in a history book. They can understand the principle behind stuff. Like, for example, we read about the atrocities the Nazis committed in World War II. You know it's bad. You see it, and it's atrocious to read about, but it doesn't really feel real to you because you haven't been there to see it. For example, they maintain Auschwitz, and people that go there and see that site in person after hearing about the atrocities that happened, they come back with a new sense of reality about the whole situation. And I think that personally helps that history is not repeated over and over again by showing these places to people, from for future generations.
And I would largely agree with that on a lot of aspects, especially ones that have great historical significance. And the reason why concentration camps are preserved in a small way, because most of the time, the temporary structures, they kept a lot of the, I guess you could say, prisoners in the camps, or yeah, I guess the prisoners would be the best word for it. The prisoners in the camps, a lot of those have degraded, deteriorated, or they were torn down, and it's really just a few of the main buildings that still exist at these camps. It's important to preserve that kind of stuff because it's also a part of the story of the world and how the world continues to move on. It also reminds people of the greatest moments in history and the darkest moments in history as well, and shows you where they happened, and there's physical examples of it. You can actually go there and see this stuff and go, this is where, say, this is where 1 million Jews died in the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. It was a dark moment in history, and here it is right here, right in front of you. It's an extremely striking image because of that. And you can also go to, say, the war rooms in London and go, this is where some of the greatest generals in Western history planned the downfall of that country that Auschwitz stood for. And you can go and look at both of them, and you can actually see everything, both the great, the terrible, and everything else in between. But also to get back to that really quickly to address that, that would make no sense, once again, for the Allies to go through, considering that that was a direct thing happening at that time, and those buildings did not have any historical significance at that moment whatsoever, to act like we had to preserve them. So that doesn't really make any sense as an argument. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next question goes to Naran, who says, would you agree that Ukraine can retaliate against Iran using diplomacy and espionage?
Diplomacy, not really. Espionage, maybe. But there isn't really many ways for them to retaliate against the Iranians, to be completely honest. So, with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Paula McDonald, who's leaving for the night, but she'll get to hear her question before she goes. And it said, is the CIA paying the Taliban to do this to Iran?
Is the CIA paying the Taliban to do this to Iran?
They might be.
They might be, but it's actually the Iranians attacking the Afghans. If you're talking about blocking the water, and if we believe that statement to be true, maybe, but, I don't really know for certain on that. I'd have to look into that a whole lot more to say what may or may not be possible behind the scenes. And also, really,
where you got to look at to find that information out?
Well,
Let me know.
You can try and look at some of the information, like have the Afghans had any guess, if they ever published that kind of stuff or information? Were there any behind the rooms meetings with certain groups of people? You can try and piece together from the diplomatic field, or the I guess you could say geopolitical field going on over there, whether that would be a possibility or not. And to be honest, I wouldn't know if it is a possibility or not right now.
Or you could just call up her handler and ask him.
Yeah, that's true. I could always call up her handler. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Rangers Rule, who says Israel be getting involved with Iran real soon, eh?
Let's see. Wait a minute, hang on. Reread that again.
That's a question kind of stated like a Canadian. They might be Canadian. Israel be getting involved with Iran real soon, eh?
I wouldn't know on that. Maybe. They always love to get involved in a lot of stuff. Really, Iran and Israel hate each other a great deal, so they always love to get involved in each other's stuff. So it may be possible, but who really knows on this one? Because it is Afghanistan, after all, that they're getting involved in. So, I don't know. Maybe. But anyways, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, once again, to go back to the topic of the historical buildings, because I see some people talking about that in the chat. Really quickly, let me tell you all some of the historical buildings that could be torn down, and people could have valid reasons for them. Let's go to the Forbidden City in Beijing. You see, back in the day, the Chinese, even back then, were kind of a little... Well, actually, no, let's talk about the modern-day semblance of it. You know what? Because that's more striking. So, the Great Leap Forward in China, 40 million people are pretty much killed outright by government policies, and Mao and all of his fellas love to always sit on the very main building of the Forbidden City to have their military parades on. Hell, this entire... y'all know what this place is right here. It's a certain square. Do not say the name, Matthew. But something happened here, and what are we going to do? Have this whole entire thing torn down along with the Forbidden City? No, I don't think we should. It is a historical structure, after all. It has been around for hundreds of years, and it's also a cultural heritage site of the Chinese. Are we going to go and destroy that? Better yet, are we going to go and start destroying things like, let me make sure to go find the right castle. Are we going to go and destroy... Damn, where's the castle? I'm trying to find it. It's actually probably somewhere around here. Here it is. Are we going to go destroy the Imperial Palace of Japan because they sponsored genocide in China and killed millions of Chinese people?
Or even worse than that, are we going to go destroy Mount Pektu in North Korea just because, you know, he was born there?
Yeah, it's like where in the world would the line be drawn there? And there's no practical line that can be drawn. It's just drawn by what people think is right and wrong, and that's too much of a personal bias to go and destroy historical sites off of. What people find right and wrong and what's okay to them and what's not okay, and then we go around and just destroy historical structures based off of modern-day whims. And that doesn't seem right at all, and it especially seems a great disservice to history, for sure, to go around and start trying to justify the destruction of historical sites for one reason or another. So, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, on top of that, another one, are we going to go and destroy Vlad the Impaler's castle, which still exists to this day, because he had tens of thousands of people impaled? You know, when you think about that, you know, and he had him impaled when he was eating, you know, just so that he could watch it for fun. He had like 1,000 people impaled on a single day while he was eating, just so that he could watch it for fun. Are we going to end up destroying castles like that? Because,
that
you
man
know,
was a freak.
Yeah, he was a real freak, you know. But nowadays, people look at that and go, "Isn't that cute? He had people impaled." You know, it's like, what are we going to start arbitrarily implying, you know, what we think is right and wrong, or what's when atrocities are cute and not cute, and go destroy historical structures left and right just because we agree with one thing's one day and then the next day we are fine with it, and then we're like, oh man, the historical structure was destroyed, you know, and then you can't go and reverse that. You can just go and try and rebuild it and have a facsimile there. And then, you know, and whenever you get the facsimile, people always want to go and bastardize them. You know, it's like, oh, you know, the original one was built with timbers. We're going to build this one out of a steel frame. And it's like, you know, no one's really going to care about that except for a history geek. And he's almost like, well, what the hell, man? Why are you rebuilding it with steel? Why not rebuild it to the original specs? But anyways, you know, I'm going on and on about that. But, you know, where in the world will the line be drawn on that? And the line is arbitrary because it just depends on your personal, I guess you could say, whims. And that's nothing to go and destroy historical structures off of. And so with that, hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Jim Woodfield, who says, Enforcer, is there any information on the average age of Russian POWs?
The average age of Russia, I don't think we actually have any numbers off of that, to be honest. So I'd have to declare ignorance on that statement at this moment. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Matt, who says, where do you expect the counteroffensive will be in Ukraine?
The counteroffensive in Ukraine will most likely be in the south in the Zaporizhia direction. That's at least what we're assuming, but, you know, we may not be entirely correct on that. And also, one second, because I have to go back to this one, because I know 100% people are going to take this kind of stuff out of context. But allow me real quick to take y'all to a country of people who have a completely different perspective than maybe some of y'all have, and ended up destroying historical structures as well. And that takes us right to Afghanistan, which has been kind of a topic in tonight's news. There is, and let me try and find it, and if any of y'all can help me out in the live chat, the giant Buddhas in Afghanistan. The Buddhas of Bamiyan. So let me the Buddhas. What the hell am I talking about? The Buddhas of Bamiyan. And so here we go. And I'll show you all this, because this is also a group of people who arbitrarily have their own beliefs and go around destroying historical structures based off of those beliefs. These are the oh my god. These are the Buddhas of Bamiyan. And these were massive, and they were carved into the walls of this mountain around the 6th century, which is around the year 500 or so. And here they are right here. At least here's 2 of them before they were completely destroyed. You can see them right there. Now, these things are massive, and they were there for well over 1,000 years, nearly 1,500 years. until the Taliban came into power over Afghanistan. You see, the Taliban is a radical Islamic group, and a lot like people here in the Western world in some ways, they have a very strong opinion on what they like and they don't like. And so they went out to these Buddhas in the mountains of Bamyan, and they had these things blown up. And so they don't exist anymore. Now in their place, there's nothing more, and let me go see if I can find the modern day picture of it. Here's the modern day picture of what exists of the Buddhas, damn it, of Bamyan. They're gone. They were blown up by the Taliban with dynamite, and they will never exist again. All that historical value and richness that was to be found in those Buddhas are gone. All that exists are these little openings in the side of the mountain. And then also there were these very nice little intricate chambers near to these Buddhas that were also destroyed as well. The Taliban just went in there with AKs and just started smashing the butts of the AKs against the wall and destroying all of the mosaics and everything else that had been made in the mountains. It's all gone. And, people in the West, just based off of, a whim will go, oh, that's so wrong to destroy these Buddhas. Just because they disagreed with what the Buddhas were in the religion that the Buddhas stand for. But you could also say the same thing about destroying other kinds of historical structures, like destroying the Kremlin. Why in the world is it okay to destroy the Kremlin, and it's not okay to destroy the Buddhas of Bamyan? What type of logic works there? Well, because we don't like the Russians, but we're kind of indifferent to the Buddhas. So the Buddhas are wrong to destroy, but the Kremlin's fine to destroy. And that is a personal bias that can't be applied across the board as a fair standard to everything. And so my answer is don't destroy any historical structure, especially if it's older than 200 years. There should be a historic protection to buildings older than 200 years, so that way they cannot be destroyed on the personal whims of a group of people who exist at that time and are going to destroy the cultural legacy and historical legacy of a country for hundreds of years onwards. I think, honestly, this is the best comparison I can make, because other comparisons, like, the one about Hitler, is trying to bring it into a modern historical context. So think about it. Kremlin, Buddhas of Bamyan. If you destroy one, you destroy both of them. Hell, you destroy everything in the world. Go destroy the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe while you're at it, or go destroy, the Brandenburg Gate or something similar. If you're going to destroy one historical site, destroy them all. And if you don't agree with that, then don't destroy any of them. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, trying to make sure that it is as unbiased as possible and trying to put in the historical perspective. And once again, if you're talking about the Second World War, where the Nazis were only in power for 12 years, obviously they're not historic. That's a 12-year-old government, and their symbols and buildings are less than 12 years old. There's nothing historic about that at that point. But with that, hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Private PFC, who says, can you guys take a look at the dinner for the missing man since it's almost Memorial Day?
The dinner for the missing man. Let me pull that up real quick. Dinner of the missing man. Missing man table. So here we go. The Missing Man Table, also known as the Fallen Comrade Table, is a ceremony and memorial that is set up in military dining facilities in the U.S. Armed Forces and during official dining functions in honor of fallen, missing, or imprisoned military service members. The table serves as the focal point of ceremonial remembrance, originally growing out of U.S. concern of Vietnam War POW and MIA issue. The Missing Man Table may be a permanent display in dining facilities and is also traditionally part of military dining and ceremonies and service balls. This ceremony may also be performed in conjunction with Veterans Day and Memorial Day services. And we can actually see a picture of an example of the Missing Man Table right here. And we can actually see the caps of pretty much all 5 services represented: the Marines, the Army, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, and the Navy. And we can also see POW MIA covers put onto the chairs.
We used to do that all the time. Every time we had an event on Memorial Day, and also any military function, like the military ball in high school, we used to set this up.
Yeah, we used to set this up, actually. So I forgot the actual name of it, but I remember me having to actually set up this specific table.
Missing Man Table.
Yeah, the Missing Man Table. Maybe twice I remember setting it up. But a very important, and especially considering that Memorial Day is actually to honor the soldiers that have been killed in war, it is very important to remember those soldiers who, of course, suffered as being prisoner of war, or are no longer here with us. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and also thank you for sharing that with us. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Janet Atkinson, who says, do you think that Russia will ever be accepted by the West again, or have they burned their bridges for a long time to come?
And can you reread that one again real quick?
Do you think that Russia will ever be accepted by the West again, or have they burned their bridges for a long time to come?
I think they probably burned their bridges for a long time to come. Most likely. But I think there will be a time that they eventually get brought back into the fold and are probably allowed to trade and do other things with the West. But it probably won't be for a while, maybe a decade or two at best. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, I saw an interesting comment in the live chat, which is a fairly interesting one. I'll weigh in my opinions here. Pantera said historic is not defined by time; it's not an age thing. So yes, the Nazi structures fit the definition of historic. Not quite. I'd have to disagree with that in my opinion. Because you see, when things are unfolding in the modern day, there's nothing really historic about them then. They become historic with how they affect the times past that point. That's why buildings like, I guess you could say colonial Jamestown are historic because they were able to weather the course of history, or colonial Williamsburg, here it is right here. This town is historic because it was able to weather the, I guess you could say, times up till the present day, and it largely exists in its original condition, and so it is historic. But back during the 1770s, let's say the town got burned down, there's nothing really of historic value being lost. Or let's say this, because this will probably be a better example that many of y'all may be able to see. So, well, yeah, and this is going to be a really hard one to say because it's like, oh crap, we're having to go there. But look at the current political field in the United States and tell me that if one of those parties built a building and in the next 10 years it was demolished, is anything of historical value really being lost there? I would say regardless of either party, I'd say no, because it's a modern day kind of like thought process and it's being affected by modern day people. So it's being affected by people during that historic time period. I don't think it's right, though, for people in the modern day to go back and destroy the historic richness of people who no longer are even alive. And society and culture at those times was completely different. Like, for example, destroying the Kremlin or the Buddhas of Bamyan. Those examples have existed for hundreds, if not over thousands of years. And so it's wrong to go and destroy those things because it's a representation of a people who once lived there. It's not really something that's being directly affected. Now, let's say those Buddhas were built in 2010 and then they were blown up in 2020. Oh, well, there's nothing really historic about them or special about them, and it doesn't reflect the cultures, values, or heritage of the people who were there. It's just an ebb and flow of the modern world. So, that really is my opinion. Like, for example, let's take another building here in the United States, one that has modern significance. Let's take, and let me think of a building. Let's take the Falling Water building built by Frank Lloyd Wright. Back in the 1930s, I believe, when that was built, there was nothing really historic about that building then, and it could easily be torn down. But over the, I guess you could say, value that people have given to the Falling Water building, and also the significance that it's had on American architectural history, while it was built in the 1930s and is only about 90 years old at this point, it kind of does qualify as a historic building. Other buildings, on the other hand, for example, to go into a little bit of a darker phase of U.S. history, Columbine High School, that isn't really a historic building, because while a historical event did happen there, the Columbine school shooting, it is a very young building. I think the building was brand new when that shooting occurred. It was only a few years old. So if the building got demolished or something similar, nothing of real historical context is kind of being lost in the modern world. But say that building is 200 years old, and the Columbine shooting happened there, and it became a defining moment in American history for all time, then it qualifies as a historic building, in my opinion. But that's only my subjective idea, and of course coming from the history department and being into history, on what qualifies as a historic building and what doesn't qualify as a historic building. And then also monuments made to historic times that are not made during that time are not historic. So say, for example, someone made a statue in Germany that had a massive swastika on it, like in the present day, and said this is a historic site because it commemorates the Nazis or something. That's not historic. That's brand new. And it's not even from that time period either. And on top of that, there's a whole denazification thing that happened in Germany, which is a part of their culture, legacy, and heritage. So there's nothing Nazi that exists in Germany, and so that would be destroyed, and there wouldn't be anything of historical value being lost there. But that's just to go through it in my opinion. And of course, you're free to disagree with that, but that's how I view historic structures and what makes one historic and non-historic. But with that, hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question goes to Charles Martel, who says Ukraine wants to get the Taurus bunker buster missile from Germany, and do you two think that this missile is suited for this war?
I think that it may be suited for the war a little bit. I don't really know a lot about the weapon, but a bunker buster, considering that the Russians are using the bunkers under the Azovstal for ammunition storage, I would say that it would be effective in that situation and maybe other similar ones. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. Also, real quick, C-Fay actually asked an interesting question. Just want to kind of give a clear answer to this kind of stuff. Said, what about the wall with all of the names of the dead of the Vietnam War? It's not really old enough, in my opinion, yet to be a historic structure. It of course is profound, and I would say it deserves protection in modern times for its profoundness as a monument to those who were killed in the Vietnam War, but I don't think it is owed the title of a historic structure yet. The U.S. Capitol building, along with Union Station, the White House, the Washington Monument, they deserve the titles of historic structure, but buildings that are more modern, they can kind of not really get the title. Of course, they deserve protection, sure, but I don't believe they deserve the protection under the premise of it being a historic structure just yet. Like, for example, the Pentagon was built in 1943. It's such a young building in a historic context, it really doesn't deserve preservation from a historic perspective. It would deserve preservation, at least in the modern world, under the premise of it being an important building to modern American culture, or something similar like that. But, that's just my opinion. That's my thoughts on it. But anyways, with that, hope that does address that fairly well once again. Very interesting question, by the way. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Will Callahan, who says, was the A-10 as good 20 years ago as the Mosquito fighter bomber was in 1945?
I would say yeah, because the Mosquito was good. Actually, a lot of people love the Mosquito, and people were always wanting more of those Mosquito attack aircraft. And I would say that the A-10 is pretty good. It's just that people aren't really into the A-10, well, at least people in military circles aren't into the A-10 as much as they were into the Mosquito, because ever since the 90s, people have been trying to find ways to retire the A-10, although it's had a pretty good service record, all things considered. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Braun Gamer, who says, with the upcoming counteroffensive, is there a possibility that the Russian line's causing a mass retreat?
And reread that one again for me real quick.
They said, with the upcoming counteroffensive, is there a possibility that the Russian line's causing a mass retreat?
I would say yes. I would say a mass retreat due to a counteroffensive is certain. Because if the Ukrainians are pushing, the Russians are running. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also I see a lot of people talking about different kinds of historic buildings, and considering I'm a history major, and that's kind of my thing. And also there was a whole class at one point I actually took on historic buildings and what is considered a historic structure and what isn't, which is where I'm kind of getting a decent amount of my rules from. Watergate is not a historic building again. Yes, it is a part of American history, but it's not really old enough to be a historic building in its own right. By the way, here's Watergate right here, if y'all ever wondered. It's not really old enough. It's only about 60 years old right now, which still makes it a modern building of modern times, and therefore could be destroyed without really any historical significance being lost at the moment. But at the same time, it is a building of serious political significance in America and a part of American political history. So modern people would be largely compelled to preserve this building and to keep it in its original state, although it is a modern building, so that we eventually will ascend to the status of being a historic building with historic significance. But right now, it isn't really a historic building because it's just too young. But it will probably make it onto a historic register, which kind of gets them into the realm of being a historic building. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Once again, in my opinion, I'm just trying to flesh out what the rules of what is a historic building and what isn't fairly well. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a question from AD, who says, how much longer until we hear that Prigozhin has been thrown out of a window?
Probably not that long. I'd probably assume maybe a few months, but not that long. If he survived longer than a few months, I would honestly be shocked. But with that, hope that does address that fairly well. And also, I gotta say this, I love how I'm a history major, Matthew, and this is actually like my subject is what is and isn't a historic building and things like that. And now people are going, I don't like history majors saying what is and isn't a historic building. It's like, what can I even talk about at that point? I'm a qualified expert on this. I have a degree in it. So, you know, it's like, what can or can I not talk about? And to address the specific person who's kind of getting heated about this, you can have your own opinions on that. This is my opinion, and I'm voicing my opinion. You can have whatever opinion you want. It doesn't really matter, and my opinion doesn't really matter either. But that's what I was largely told in my major that I'm an expert on in the subject of history, what is and isn't a historic building. And that's largely what I'm going with. You know, if you disagree with that, that's fine, but you don't have to get violent over it. And so with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Margaret Hemsley, who says, have you seen any World War I or World War II weapons being used by the Russians?
We have. We've seen Maxim guns being used, and we've also seen Mosin guns, just to name the most mainstream examples of firearms being used that were from a Second World War era by the Russian army. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Renee B, who says, as long as Putin stays in the Kremlin, is he safe? And before the enforcer answers that question, I personally think that he will be safe as long as he's in the Kremlin. And that's probably why he doesn't leave very often, because I think it's really a little bit extreme to say that we should blow the Kremlin up, because that would be the equivalent of blowing up the White House, and that would evoke the worst type of response possible, and I don't see how it would benefit the situation whatsoever. Of course, everyone would love to do that, to retaliate for the evil acts that Putin has done in Ukraine, but we have to face reality here, and we can't go take extremes quite like that. But there's other possibilities that we could explore, but sadly can't discuss them on the stream because YouTube might not like it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say he would probably be safe in the Kremlin. If honestly, if someone like if he was in charge of having to fire a missile at the Kremlin, probably would never be blown up because it is a historic building, and I respect it for being a historic building. But you know, there's certainly other ways to get to him while he's in the Kremlin. You know, soup could be a little bit odd tasting. You know, he could always get a little pat on the cheek from some stranger that had some dirty hands. You know, there's all kinds of ways to still get him while he's in the Kremlin. It's just that I don't think the Kremlin will ever be blown up to get him, unless if it came to a very serious end where it had to be done. Then it would, of course, be done. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, I think we're on to the second to last question of the night.
And I think this is actually the last question of the night.
No way. Okay. I got to
Yes.
go through my theme. And so, who is the lucky last person to put in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Daily Prayer, who says, can you guys talk about KGB Putin's involvement in the fall of the Berlin Wall in December of 1989, and did it affect him psychologically?
I would honestly have to say I don't really know what Putin's involvement was in the fall of the Berlin Wall. I just know it wasn't supposed to come down that day, you see. What happened was that there was a press conference where East Germany and West Germany were supposed to slowly reunite, and they were going to allow free travel over the East German-West German border soon in the future. Problem is that during the press conference in East Germany, a journalist asked, when will that go into effect? And the guy who was I guess you could say, what's the name, Matthew, of the guy, the press secretary? Yeah, the press secretary who was in charge at that time. He misspoke, and he said, immediately without delay, period, which meant that day. And so then that's why the Berlin Wall fell, is because that guy actually made a misstatement. It wasn't actually supposed to happen immediately without delay. It was supposed to happen immediately without delay on a governmental level, which meant a few months. It wasn't supposed to happen that day, and then that's why the Berlin Wall fell. I wouldn't really know about Putin's involvement, though, in the KGB during that incident. Unfortunately, I'd have to declare ignorance on that because I don't know that exact story, but that's how the Berlin Wall fell. And also, because the Berlin Wall is a bit of it's kind of a historic structure because it's fairly fairly important, at least to German history. There's a large amount of the wall that was actually just completely destroyed, but small amounts of it still exist to this day, and they're being preserved under the premise of it was a important structure in modern cultural significance, and eventually it will work its way into becoming a historic structure if parts of the wall last for several hundred years. It will most likely become something akin to, say, the Brandenburg Gate, which is also a historic structure. It's been around since the early 19th century, which qualifies it as a historic structure. It'll probably be under the same premise of being like the Tower Bridge, or the Tower of London, something like that. It will probably be under those premises, but once again, not really a historic building now. It's just being preserved because it has profound cultural significance to Germany, at least at the moment. But with that, I hope that does address that at least the best I can, and give a little interesting tidbit and fact about that. And of course, it is the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching. It's of course been a great pleasure running tonight's stream, and of course helping this fundraiser get to the moon. And of course, I got to thank every single one of y'all who was a part of the Lee Spring Army for helping this fundraiser to be possible. We ended up reaching $13,295 raised onto tonight's fundraiser.
Damn.
And let me try and do some rough math here to tell y'all how far away we are from reaching $1 million raised. So let me go down to the bottom of my little sheet here. 973 plus 13.3. Let's see. 973, 976, 977. We are at $977,000 raised in support of Ukraine across all of our fundraisers. That's a rough estimate. We'll, of course, add that after this fundraiser is closed out in the middle of tomorrow. But we're around
crazy.
That's crazy, man. we're only
We're
only $23,000 away from reaching $1 million raised through all of our fundraisers in support of Ukraine. And I've got to thank the LSA once again for making that entirely possible. Outside of the, I believe it's around $12,000 to, I believe it is around $12,000 that I've personally put into the fundraiser through my $100 donations to it, y'all have been the entire weight of these fundraisers. Y'all have raised all of this in support of Ukraine. This is y'all's success. This is the Lee Spring Army's success. And we've believed that since day one. And I've got to give y'all massive credit for making these fundraisers possible and helping them to get so far. Because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, the Lee Spring Army would never have the late acclaim that we have raised $977,000 in support of Ukraine, and we wouldn't be so close to $1 million. We wouldn't have helped out anyone if it wasn't for the Lee Spring Army and who the Lee Spring Army is made up of. And I got to thank y'all all so much once again for making this channel possible, for making these fundraisers possible, and once again, showing the entire world what the Lee Spring Army is. There is no other fundraisers on YouTube that reach the levels that these do. And that's not even a stretch of a statement. From what we know, these fundraisers are the largest ones that run on YouTube on a weekly basis. And we've raised more through the YouTube Give system over 459 days than any other channel that we've known of. And so with that, thank you all so much once again for watching. Thank you for making this a historic night, worthy of preservation due to its cultural significance to the people of the time. And of course, thank you all once again for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It makes us very happy when folks subscribe to this channel. It lets us know that we're doing something good. And we'll see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, and of course, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army.
And good night in Slav Ukraine, and also honor to all the fallen heroes. Happy Memorial Day.
Happy Memorial Day.
Yes. The Lee Spring Army sends its regards